LoveLore Library. Chapter 187. Shinyu sat up from Shang Junlin's arms. The charming atmosphere disappeared in an instant because of this sentence. He looked at Shang Junlin with a little confusion in his eyes. Why is there still someone here? Shang Junlin helped Shinyu to stand up. He stood up and tidied his clothes. I'll go and see. Eunuch Meng was waiting outside. Shang Junlin changed his clothes and walked out. What happened? The leader of the Imperial Guards is already waiting for your Majesty outside. Your Majesty, this way please. Eunuch Meng didn't know the details, but he knew that this matter couldn't be delayed. He hurriedly led the way for Shang Junlin. It was still morning. Usually, Shinyu wouldn't even get up at this time. After Shang Junlin left, he couldn't sleep, so he asked Mu Shi to order breakfast. When he was eating alone, Shinyu ate faster than usual. He wasn't picky about food, so he casually ate something to fill his stomach. The snow outside had stopped. Shang Junlin didn't come back. It seemed that this matter wasn't small. Mu Shi, go and ask the people outside if there are any abnormalities in the capital recently. Yes. After a year of training, the people Shinyu raised in the village were now able to take charge of things independently. It was easy for them to find some information that wasn't deliberately concealed. While waiting for the news, Shinyu had nothing to do. He simply went to the small study room, took out a pen and paper, and wrote down what would happen in the future based on his impressions from his previous life. Events were listed one by one on the paper. Shinyu pressed his fingers against his forehead, trying to find something that could be related to today's matter. After a long time, Shinyu folded the paper and put it in the candlelight to burn it bit by bit. Shinyu didn't want to keep this kind of thing that was related to the future. When he came out of the small study room, it was already noon. The weather was clear, and the sun was high in the sky, bringing a trace of warmth to the cold winter. Shinyu walked into the sunlight and narrowed his eyes slightly. Thinking about it carefully, today's incident was not sudden. After King Yu was captured, Shang Junlin kept him locked up in prison without dealing with him. His purpose was to fish out all the forces behind King Yu. Although they had caught many forces behind King Yu, they still had no clue about the leader. There had to be someone controlling such a huge faction. As long as they did not find the controller, they would not be able to feel at ease. It was very likely that these factions that suddenly appeared outside the capital were here for King Yu. After Shang Junlin came back, Shinyu's guess was confirmed. These people's whereabouts are uncertain, as if they had suddenly appeared. However, the Imperial Army still found some similarities between them and the people from before. Now that the King of Yu is locked up in the prison of the Ministry of Justice, the traces of these people's activities revolve around the prison. Their target is most likely the King of Yu. Shang Junlin took off his cloak and sat down beside Shinyu. A Yu is playing chess by himself? In front of Shinyu, there was a chessboard. On the chessboard, the black and white pieces were fighting fiercely. If either side was careless, they would lose by one piece. Shinyu put down a white piece, and the white piece instantly suppressed the black piece with an absolute advantage. Shinyu did not put down a black piece again. Instead, he looked at the chessboard and asked, Your Majesty, who do you think will win? Looking at the situation, the white piece is very likely to win. The black piece is heavily surrounded and has no way to retreat. But it seems that if I want, the black piece can make a comeback. The real winner is not the black piece or the white piece, but me, the player, right? Until the last moment, who can say that he is the chess player? Outside the capital, the well-trained black-clothed men in uniform were hiding in the dark. The leader of the Imperial Guards led his subordinates into the area where the black-clothed men were hiding. No matter what the purpose of these black-clothed men was, since they had been discovered, they might as well stay here. A silent battle unfolded in the deserted forest. The strong smell of blood attracted the wild beasts in the depths of the forest. They tried to approach and drag away delicious food, but before they could get close, they were forced to retreat by the murderous aura. The sky gradually darkened, and the movements in the forest gradually disappeared. The leader of the Imperial Guards supported himself with his sword and wiped the blood on his face with his free hand. See if there are any survivors. Also, check the surroundings. Don't let anyone escape. Yes, Your Excellency. After packing up everything, the leader of the Imperial Guards went into the palace to report. Unfortunately, this batch of people sent out were all men of sacrifice. They were completely wiped out by the Imperial Guards, so there was no way to get any useful information. Since there was a first batch of people around the capital, there was bound to be a second and a third batch. Shang Junlin specially deployed an army to guard outside the capital. Once they found something wrong, there was no need to report it. They could take action directly. There are strict investigations everywhere. Where did these people come from? In front of Xinyu, there was a map of Dahuan. On the map, there were many red marks. These were the places where the rebel army had appeared. Gu Huai was ordered to lead the army to eliminate the remnants of the rebel army. Now, he had eliminated several places, and the results were obvious. Shang Junlin stood beside him and looked at the map. The other red marks were all connected to each other. Only the one that appeared near the capital was not connected to any other place. It was as if it had appeared out of nowhere. I don't know. Besides the first day, there were no traces of these people. I also sent people to watch the Ministry of Justice, but there were no suspicious people. Your Majesty, please withdraw those people outside the capital. If they continue to wander outside, the mastermind can only watch. Shang Junlin turned to look at Xinyu. Their eyes met, and Xinyu blinked. Shang Junlin looked away and said, "Okay." The people in the capital suddenly realized that the Imperial Guards who often patrolled around the city had disappeared. The more observant people even realized that the soldiers who had been patrolling outside the city had also disappeared. What the hell is going on? There were suddenly more patrols on the streets, but they suddenly disappeared today. Maybe the higher-ups feel that there is no more danger. Don't say. When there are more patrols, there are fewer thieves. In the past, there were thieves sent to the Yamen almost every day at this time. This year, there are not many. If you didn't say it, I wouldn't have noticed. It's true. The Imperial Court did not reveal anything, so the people did not know what was happening outside. In their impression, the leader of the rebels, King Yu, had been arrested and his forces disbanded. All the problems had been solved, and they could have a good year this year. The Imperial Court could not tell the people everything. Many things were selectively published in the newspapers. Some things that were not suitable to be said would not appear in the newspapers. Subei. Near the end of the year, Jiang Huiqing returned to Subei after dealing with the matter of Lin Yuan. This year was the same as last year. He and Jiang Huiqing spent the new year together. Many of the officials who came to Subei were young and had not been here for long. Those who did not bring their families simply suggested that everyone celebrate the new year together. Being in a foreign land, it was better to celebrate the new year together than to be alone. A few days in advance, the government of Subei had already begun to prepare for the new year. This was their first new year here, and also their first year on the road. No matter what the future held, at least for now, everyone's relationship was very harmonious. On a very ordinary day, Qinyu planned to ask Jiang Huiqing to go out for a walk. The customs of Subei were not the same as those of the capital. Before the new year, there would be a large market. The people would take out the goods they had hoarded for a year to exchange for what they wanted. It was very lively. Feng Jiayi went out with her people. The other officials also called their close friends to go out with them. They did not have to buy anything. It was good to just join in the fun. Someone invited He Qingyu, but he refused. He had already discussed with Jiang Huiqing that they would go out together. The person who sent the invitation teased him, "You have an appointment with official Jiang again?" He Qingyu smiled but did not say anything. "I knew it would be like this," the person muttered in a low voice. "If we didn't know your identities, everyone would suspect that you were not real brothers. Even real brothers are not as clingy as you. Huiqing and I hit it off at first sight. Now that we are far away in Subei, we naturally have to take care of each other. We know that you have a good relationship. Then we won't disturb you. Let's meet again next time." After saying this, they left together. He Qingyu tidied himself up. After waiting for a long time, Jiang Huiqing did not come out. He could only go and knock on the door. "Huiqing, it's time. Do you feel unwell anywhere? If you don't feel well, it's the same to go another day." The door was opened a small crack. Jiang Huiqing poked his head out. "I don't feel unwell, but something happened." "Brother Qingyu, come in first." He Qingyu calmly observed Jiang Huiqing. Seeing that he was just a little depressed and had no other problems, he was slightly relieved. "What is it?" "I'm afraid I can't go and talk to Brother Qingyu again." Jiang Huiqing walked to the table and sat down. "I have to leave Subei. His Majesty wants to summon you back." For some reason, He Qingyu's heart skipped a beat. "No." Jiang Huiqing held the cup, his gaze somewhat blank. "His Majesty has given me a new mission." When the secret order was issued, Shang Junlin did not say anything definite. He gave Jiang Huiqing the leeway to refuse. This trip was very risky, but at the same time, if it was successful, the rewards would not be small. With Jiang Huiqing's background, if not for Shang Junlin's intentional nurturing, it would be impossible for him to make a name for himself in court without a decade or two. Therefore, after receiving the secret order, Jiang Huiqing did not hesitate to agree. He had things he wanted to do. If it could shorten the time, he was willing to pay any price. Jiang Huiqing was a very decisive person. Once he made a decision, he would not regret it. The only thing that made him hesitate was He Qingyu. He and He Qingyu had discussed how to build Subei well together, how to strive for the best in these few years, and then return to the capital in glory. Now, he was going to break the contract. "Can you tell me?" He Qingyu suppressed the panic rising in his heart. "It's okay if you don't want to talk. I can't tell you about His Majesty's secret order." Jiang Huiqing shook his head. "Okay, I won't ask. When are you leaving?" He Qingyu paused. "You should be able to tell me about this, right? It'll probably be after the new year, or maybe before. After I leave, I'll need you to cover for me. You can't let anyone know that I'm not here." Chapter 188. Jiang Huiqing is going there for De Huan. "No matter what, I don't want him to die in the northern desert. Naturally, I have to take some measures. Not only the hidden dragon guards, but also the hidden dragon guards. When he reaches the northern desert, the hidden dragon guards will listen to his orders." Shang Junlin caressed Xinyu's cheek. More importantly, he knew that Xinyu valued Jiang Huiqing a lot. As one of Xinyu's few friends, Shang Junlin didn't want anything to happen that would make Xinyu unhappy. Jiang Huiqing's trip to the northern desert this time was risky. Everyone knew this, including Jiang Huiqing himself. Shang Junlin wasn't heartless. He gave Jiang Huiqing a choice. If Jiang Huiqing didn't want to go, he wouldn't force him. Actually, when I sent someone to deliver the secret edict, I asked for Jiang Huiqing's opinion. If he didn't want to go, I would choose someone else. Your Majesty is so nice. Xinyu leaned on Shang Junlin's shoulder. The other force around Jiang Huiqing is my man. I think your majesty has already guessed it. Compared to his previous life, Jiang Huiqing's career in this life was much smoother. If he could return from the northern desert smoothly, he would definitely be able to gain a foothold in the imperial court in the shortest time possible. Shen Yu always had a bit of selfishness towards Jiang Huiqing. He didn't deny this. Shen Yu wouldn't mistreat his subordinates who had gone through fire and water with him in his previous life, even if he didn't experience those things in this life. Soon, it was the new year. The palace was decorated in festive red. With Shen Yu as the host, the palace was even more lively. There was a big banquet in the palace. The ministers brought their families to attend this banquet. In some ways, it showed how much the emperor valued the ministers. When Shen Yu and Shang Junlin arrived, the ministers had already arrived. Shang Junlin led Shen Yu directly to the highest position. The ministers were already used to His Majesty's preferential treatment of Shen Yu, so no one stood out to say anything. In fact, this kind of banquet was quite boring. Shen Yu was not interested in listening to the compliments of the ministers. He focused on the delicious food in front of him. Having learned their lesson from last time, this time, there was no wine on the table in front of them. There were only various kinds of soups and fresh fruit drinks that the imperial chef had concocted. Shen Yu picked it up and tasted it. It was sweet and had a unique fruity aroma. It was exceptionally delicious. He looked down and saw that no one was paying attention to them. He scooped up a spoonful and brought it to Shang Junlin's mouth. Your Majesty, try it. Shang Junlin opened his mouth and ate the food in the spoon. It's very sweet. Their little interaction did not escape the eyes of the ministers who had been secretly watching their movements. The courtiers rarely saw how Shen Yu and Shang Junlin got along in private. Seeing this scene, they couldn't help but widen their eyes. Was this still their decisive and unyielding His Majesty who would not allow strangers to approach? They knew that Shen Yu was favored, but they only had a vague idea of how favored. Only when they saw the two interacting with each other did they know that Shang Junlin didn't just favor Shen Yu. The favor of the emperor was the easiest to get and the easiest to lose. But that was when favor came before love. Looking at the current situation, it was obvious that His Majesty was sincere. The ministers had different thoughts in their minds. Shen Yu didn't care what they thought. He was still clingy with Shang Junlin. How they interacted in private was how they interacted now. Is it still the same group of dancers today? Shen Yu put down his chopsticks and calculated the time. It was almost time. No. Shang Junlin pursed his lips. It's someone else this time. Is His Majesty still jealous of what happened last time? Shen Yu leaned forward and almost leaned on Shang Junlin. It's been so long, His Majesty still hasn't forgotten? Shen Yu was talking about what happened last time at Shang Junlin's birthday banquet. Although Shen Yu paid a heavy price afterwards, Shen Yu still felt that it was very interesting when he thought about it. Shang Junlin raised his hand and stroked Shen Yu's waist. With a little force, Shen Yu's waist softened and she fell into the man's arms. Shen Yu leaned in the man's arms and trembled with laughter. His Majesty didn't send them away, right? Did he have to be so cute? Just because he looked at them a few more times, he changed them. Shen Yu found that Shang Junlin's jealousy was really strong. Sometimes it was quite interesting to see a man jealous. Even if he was jealous, he would also be jealous. Shang Junlin held the shoulder of the person in his arms. Zhen let them out of the palace. Shen Yu trembled even more. She couldn't hide the smile in her voice. If I looked at them a few more times today, wouldn't His Majesty also send the dancers out of the palace? Shang Junlin pursed his lips and didn't answer. Obviously, he had this thought in his heart. If this continues, after a few more times, there might not be enough dancers in the palace. His Majesty really doesn't need to do this. Today, I will only look at His Majesty, not them, okay? Xinyu propped herself up and withdrew from Shang Junlin's arms. There was still a smile on her face and her eyes were full of moonlight. Shang Junlin used his free hand to touch Xinyu's face. You have to do what you say. Xinyu did what she said. No matter how attractive the following songs and dances were, she only supported her head with her hands and looked at Shang Junlin. Shang Junlin wasn't interested in singing and dancing. His attention fell on Xinyu. He knew Xinyu's taste, so he constantly put the dishes that Xinyu liked into his bowl. The fish meat was deboned, so Xinyu only needed to eat it directly. The dishes at the banquet were very rich. The dishes that were sent to Xinyu were all freshly scooped out of the pot. They were steaming hot. The atmosphere was very harmonious. Of course, Xinyu didn't only eat by herself. When she saw something she liked, she would also pick it up and feed it to Shang Junlin. Shang Junlin didn't refuse. As long as Xinyu picked it up, he would eat it. Feeding Shang Junlin was a very fulfilling thing. He wasn't picky about food. No matter what Xinyu fed him, he would get a positive response. The atmosphere between the two was harmonious. There was no room for the existence of a third person. Many ministers who had married and established their own careers saw the interaction between the two and felt a burst of toothache. Even when their relationship with their wives was at its best, they weren't so clingy. Fang Jie was far away in Subei. In the Fang family, only Fang Darren and Madame Fang were left. After entering the cabinet, the Fang family status rose. Many people wanted to establish a relationship with Madame Fang. His Majesty treats Guijun very well. A madam sighed with emotion. No wonder His Majesty doesn't want new people to enter the palace. His Majesty's grace is indeed very rare. Another madam whispered. The election will be held after spring. I don't know if His Majesty will agree this time. I don't think so. I've already found a marriage for my daughter. Whether His Majesty chooses or not, it has nothing to do with us. Your daughter is only 15 years old this year. She's at the prime of her life. Why settle down so early? What if His Majesty agrees? Look at how clingy His Majesty and Guijun are. Do you think His Majesty will agree? In the past, when there was no one in the harem, His Majesty refused to hold the election. Now that Guijun is here, he won't. The madam who spoke was a first-rank noble. Her husband was competent, and so were her children. She had a 15-year-old daughter who was raised like a pearl. Her talent and appearance were superb. Madame Fang pulled her hand and said in a low voice, "You're doing the right thing. You love your own daughter. The harem is not a good place." Yes. Originally, we thought that if His Majesty agreed to hold the election this year, we would send our daughter into the palace. I'm not boasting, but with my daughter's talent, there's still a chance. But now, I don't think so. His Majesty obviously has someone in his heart. If His Majesty is willing to hold the election for Guijun's sake, I'll admire him. If he does, it's not worth it for my daughter to enter the palace. Parents always wanted the best for their children. Although it was normal for a man to have 3 wives and 4 concubines, how many women in the world could truly be unaffected by this matter? It was just that they didn't have a choice. Actually, I'm very envious of you. Not only me, but most of the madams here are envious of you. She pulled Madame Fang's hand. If it's possible, I hope that my daughter's future husband can be like Lord Fang, who can only have one in his life. If your Jai is a boy, I'll be thick-skinned and ask for her hand in marriage. Xinyu and Shang Junlin couldn't feel the movements below. After a while, Shen Yu was a little full. Shang Junlin had been paying attention to his expression. Seeing this, he put down his chopsticks and took a handkerchief to wipe the corners of his mouth. Shen Yu touched his stomach, and a trace of satisfaction flashed in his eyes. Is His Majesty full? Shen Yu didn't need to ask to know that most likely not. This kind of banquet was like this. The purpose was not to eat, but to represent the meaning. The ministers raised their glasses and the atmosphere was quite warm. Outside the palace, the leader of the Imperial Guards and his men lay in ambush in the dark, watching the movements in front of them intently. On the surface, the roads leading to the prison of the Ministry of Justice seemed empty, but in fact, they were all heavily guarded. Tonight was the night of the banquet in the palace. In comparison, the security was at its weakest. If they wanted to do something, it was the best time to choose. On the surface, the leader of the Imperial Guards was attending the banquet in the palace. In fact, he was lying in ambush on the roads leading to the prison of the Ministry of Justice with his men. As the night deepened, a grand firework was lit by the moat. The people flocked to the moat, and the other places seemed empty. Gotcha! Very light footsteps were heard. The Imperial Guards lay in ambush. After 15 minutes, men in black appeared at the entrance of the alley like ghosts. After confirming that the road was safe, they rushed to the prison of the Ministry of Justice with a clear goal. Little did they know that they had stepped into a carefully arranged trap. In a quiet corner, a silent killing was going on. Blood dripped down and dyed the bluestone road red. Occasionally, there were sounds, but they were drowned out by the loud roar of the fireworks. The people in the palace knew nothing about what was happening outside. The music was pleasant to the ears. The dancers in the middle of the hall were moving. They were wearing light-colored muslin dresses. As they danced, their sleeves fluttered, making them look like fairies. Shen Yu ate and drank to his heart's content. He couldn't help but take a few more glances. Shang Junlin held his head and turned to look at him. You said he wouldn't look today. There was a subtle complaint in his voice. Shen Yu calmly looked away and his eyes fell on Shang Junlin's face. His eyebrows curved. Your Majesty is still the most handsome. Shen Yu didn't lie. When he first saw him, he was stunned by his face. His facial features were deep, his eyebrows were sharp, and his narrow eyes were emotionless. When he looked at Shen Yu, his heart trembled. But now, his eyes were filled with warmth because of him. When he looked at Shen Yu, his eyes were always filled with restrained and unbridled affection. Under his direct gaze, Shang Junlin's earlobes were tinged with light crimson. Shen Yu curiously reached out to touch them. His wide coat accidentally swept the cup on the table. The cup fell to the ground and made a crisp sound. It was just a small episode, so Shen Yu didn't take it to heart. Unexpectedly, a dancer who was closer to them suddenly pounced on them. Chapter 189. The dancer moved very quickly and brought along a fragrance. Shen Yu subconsciously held his breath, but he still smelled it. Shang Junlin moved even faster. He protected Shen Yu with one hand and threw the plate on the table outside. The hidden dragon guards who were guarding outside the main hall broke through the door and entered. The assassination had ended before it even started. The dancer was quickly subdued, and the rest of the dancers were also restrained. Shang Junlin walked down with Shen Yu in his arms. The dancer knelt on the ground and did not say a word. The dagger in her hand was knocked to the ground. Shen Yu noticed that the dagger was glowing with a blue light. It was obviously poisoned. The banquet was forced to stop. After a short moment of panic, the officials regained their senses and stood aside to protect their family members. Including the assassination during the autumn hunt, this was the second assassination attempt this year. Shang Junlin took the sword from the guard and lifted the dancer's chin. He looked at her coldly and asked, "Who ordered you to come?" The dancer's gaze stopped on Shang Junlin for a while before it fell on Xinyu. Xinyu frowned. He felt a little dizzy. He was probably affected by the fragrance. Since he was young, he could not accept certain fragrances. Coincidentally, the fragrance that he smelled just now was one of them. When the officials saw this scene, some of them were quick-witted. They had already recalled that the dancer only attacked after Xinyu swept the cup to the ground. Xinyu also recalled what happened just now. His mind was very muddled now. It was difficult for him to even think, let alone figure out what happened. Xinyu clenched his hands tightly. He wanted to stay awake, but his consciousness was getting more and more muddled. Shang Junlin felt that something was wrong with him. He retracted his gaze and looked at the young man in his arms. "Are you feeling unwell?" Xinyu shook his head. He couldn't faint at this time. Under the watchful eyes of the public, the dancer attacked him because he dropped the cup. If he couldn't solve this problem as soon as possible, it would be very troublesome in the future. Even if Shang Junlin believed him, the court officials would not. Since the dancer dared to do this, she must have a backup plan. If they continued to investigate, they would most likely find him. Xinyu bit the tip of her tongue hard, trying to wake herself up. The stimulation brought by the pain dispelled the fog in her mind. Seeing that it was effective, Xinyu quickly reached out and grabbed the sword in Shang Junlin's hand. The sharp blade cut open his skin, and blood flowed down the blade. "Ayu!" Shang Junlin wanted to withdraw his sword, but Xinyu held it tightly. If he exerted force, he would definitely cause more damage to Xinyu. The dancer's expression changed slightly, as if she hadn't expected him to hurt her. A sharp pain came from his palm, and his mind became clearer and clearer. Xinyu curved his lips and smiled. The smile was cold and didn't reach his eyes. Shang Junlin kept exerting force on Xinyu's shoulder, and his other hand almost couldn't hold the hilt of the sword. He let go of Xinyu's shoulder and stroked his face. There was a slight tremble in his voice. "You, let go. Be good." The court officials were stunned by what was happening in front of them. They didn't understand why things suddenly developed to this point. Xinyu withdrew from the man's arms. His body swayed a bit, and then he slowly stood firm. One of his hands was still holding the sharp blade, and the blood stained his sleeve. It was painful to look at, but he seemed to feel nothing and took a step forward. This step completely exposed him in the eyes of the dancer. Looking at the dancer's incredulous eyes, Xinyu's smile became bigger and bigger. "Ayu!" Shang Junlin grabbed Xinyu's wrist with his free hand. "If you have something to say, we can talk. Let go first, don't hurt yourself." Xinyu looked back at Shang Junlin. This was the first time that Shang Junlin saw such an expression on Xinyu's face. It was strange, but also very moving. He felt his heart beating violently in his chest. He didn't know if it was because he was afraid or because he was moved. He was afraid that Xinyu would be hurt, but he was crazily moved by the young man whose whole body was screaming danger. Xinyu saw the worry in Shang Junlin's eyes. His wrist felt hot, and his fingers loosened little by little. Clang! The sword fell to the ground. Someone summoned the imperial physician. Shang Junlin quickly went to check Xinyu's hand. Xinyu's hand was covered with blood. The blood meandered to the gaps between his fingers, and it was hard to tell where the wound was. Shang Junlin carefully held Xinyu's hand. His eyes were so red that they almost burned his eyes. He didn't dare to use force, and could only carefully hold Xinyu's hand in his palm. "Does it hurt?" Shang Junlin's voice was very soft, but the heartache in his tone couldn't be ignored. Xinyu's fingers curled up, but Shang Junlin pinched them with his other hand. "Don't move, it will bleed." Shin Yu stared at his hand for a while. Under the stimulation of the pain, he reluctantly recovered his thoughts. "It doesn't hurt." How could it not hurt? Shang Junlin only looked at it, but he felt the pain. He had fought in the battlefield when he was young, and had suffered countless injuries. If this injury appeared on his own body, he wouldn't even frown. But when this injury appeared on Shin Yu's body, he couldn't tolerate it. Eunuch Meng was already stunned by what was happening in front of him. When he heard Shang Junlin's voice, he came back to his senses. He quickly ordered several little eunuchs to call the imperial physician. Mu Shi stood on the side. She wanted to come closer, but she didn't dare to. She had been with Shin Yu for many years and had seen many sides of Shin Yu. But she had never seen Shin Yu like this. He was full of the word dangerous. The injured hand was carefully held in the palm of Shang Junlin's hand. Blood flowed down his palm and soaked their sleeves. Shin Yu blinked and pulled his hand back from the man's hand. He half squatted in front of the dancer and asked the same question as Shang Junlin. "Who ordered you to do this?" Although it was the same question, the dancer knew that Shang Junlin was asking who ordered the assassination, while Shin Yu was asking who ordered the framing. "Master, it was you who ordered it, really?" Shin Yu suddenly reached out and grabbed the dancer's neck. "The person behind you didn't really think that he could throw dirty water on me with just a few words, did he?" His fingers tightened, and the dancer's breathing became difficult. Her face became more and more ugly. Shin Yu used his injured hand. The more strength he used, the more blood flowed out of the wound. As if the blood that flowed out wasn't his own, Shin Yu didn't even frown. His wrist was grabbed again. Shang Junlin hugged Shin Yu from behind. "You, be good. Let go of your hand first. I know that this matter has nothing to do with you. Let me see your hand." Shang Junlin managed to pry Shin Yu's hand away with great difficulty and tightly restrained his wrist to prevent him from doing anything to hurt him again. Mu Shi handed over a clean handkerchief. Shang Junlin carefully bandaged the wound on Shin Yu's hand. "Your Majesty, take the assassin away first." The Prime Minister walked out and said. Shang Junlin held Shin Yu in his arms. "Take him away and interrogate the person behind the scenes. If you can't find anything, don't even think about keeping your official hats." "Your Majesty, what if?" Another Prime Minister stood out and carefully looked at the young man who was firmly protected in Shang Junlin's arms. "There won't be any what if. Your Majesty and I have been together day and night. If you really have disloyalty, why would you go through so much trouble to assassinate me?" Shin Yu wanted to say something, but he was held in the man's arms. Shang Junlin lowered his head and whispered in his ear, "Don't be afraid, I will take care of it." Shin Yu struggled twice, but he was suppressed by the man. Shang Junlin was really scared. In order to prevent him from hurting himself, Shang Junlin had to hold him tightly in his arms. His breath was full of the familiar scent. His strong arms held a safe space. Shin Yu's tense mind slowly relaxed. The imperial physician hurried over. The main hall was in a mess. Shang Junlin carried Shin Yu to the back of the hall. The Prime Minister and Fang Jun were left to deal with the matters in front. Imperial physician Gu had already learned about the general situation on the way. He first checked the pulse, then treated Shin Yu's wound. The handkerchief was untied, and the blood on his palm was wiped away little by little. Shin Yu shrank his fingers in pain. Shang Junlin held his wrist, and his voice was indiscernible. "Do you feel pain now?" The pain constantly stimulated the nerves. Shin Yu's mind was sometimes confused and sometimes sober. He looked at Shang Junlin for a while, then leaned over to his face and bit his chin. It was not heavy, and he didn't even feel pain. Shang Junlin only felt that his heart was lightly stung, and it was sore and numb. He held Shin Yu's head and let him lean on his shoulder. He asked Imperial Physician Gu, "How is Yu's condition?" "The wound on his hand is a bit deep. Don't let it come into contact with water for a short period of time. He also needs to avoid certain foods." This official will list some precautions. Also, this official wants to check what Your Majesty ate today. "What's the matter?" Shin Yu rubbed Shang Junlin's shoulder and whispered, "It's a fragrance. I can't stand the fragrance of that dancer." "If you can't stand it, then why were you so close to her just now?" Shin Yu admitted that he was in the wrong, so he didn't say anything. Imperial Physician Gu checked Shin Yu's pulse again. At Shin Yu's request, he also checked Shang Junlin's pulse. Without a doubt, Shang Junlin didn't have any problems. The fragrance only worked on Shin Yu. Shang Junlin called Eunuch Meng over and whispered a few words to him. Eunuch Meng left the back of the hall and went to do what Shang Junlin instructed. "Will this fragrance affect Yu's body?" Shang Junlin held Shin Yu's injured hand and didn't dare to use too much strength. At present, other than causing a certain degree of drowsiness, there won't be any other symptoms. This official needs to observe for a few days to see what will happen next, Imperial Physician Gu answered cautiously. Shang Junlin rubbed Shin Yu's fingers and didn't say anything. Imperial Physician Gu took out the medicine from the medicine box. "This is for external application. Apply it once a day in the morning and once a day. It's good for the recovery of the wound." This official will prescribe another prescription to remove the effects of the fragrance in your body. Mu Shi put the medicine away. She was worried, but the emperor was present, so she couldn't ask directly. "Miss Mu Shi, please decoct the medicine on this prescription quickly. This official needs to see the effect." Imperial Physician Gu handed the written prescription to Mu Shi. Mu Shi didn't dare to delay and took the prescription to decoct the medicine. Cough, cough. Shin Yu coughed a few times in a low voice. Because he had lost too much blood, his face was very pale. Shang Junlin was anxious, but he couldn't do anything. A strong sense of powerlessness swept over him. He could only hug Shin Yu harder in his arms. The pain gradually disappeared, and his consciousness gradually became dizzy. Shin Yu resisted and shrank back when the bitter medicine entered his mouth. "Yu, listen to me. You won't feel uncomfortable after drinking the medicine." Shang Junlin asked Imperial Physician Gu a lot of questions while Shin Yu was semi-conscious. When Shin Yu regained consciousness again, he didn't know how much time had passed. The bitter taste in his mouth couldn't be removed. He pushed the man who was holding him tightly. "Your Majesty, I want to drink water." Shang Junlin touched his face and got up to pour water for him. After drinking a cup of water and eating a few candied fruits, the bitterness in his mouth finally dissipated a little. Shin Yu looked around at the layout of the surroundings. They had already returned to Yuzhang Palace. "Your Majesty, that dancer, I will take care of it." You don't have to worry," Shang Junlin helped Shin Yu sit up. "I have already handed this matter to the Prime Minister and Fang Jun to take care of it. Nothing will happen." Shin Yu leaned against the headboard of the bed. He had already changed into his pajamas. His right hand hurt a little. He raised his hand and saw his tightly wrapped palm. He could feel a slight pain when he moved his fingers. Shang Junlin held his hand and stuffed it back under the quilt. Imperial Physician Gu said that this hand can't be used for the time being, and it can't touch water. Shin Yu nodded. Shang Junlin pinched Shin Yu's injured finger and gently rubbed it. Does it hurt?" Without waiting for Shin Yu to answer, Shang Junlin continued, "I am in a lot of pain. Seeing Yu injured, I am in a lot of pain." Shin Yu suddenly swallowed the words he wanted to say and pursed his lips. His eyes revealed a complicated expression. "With me here, what Yu is worried about will never happen. You don't need to hurt yourself to prove anything. Shang Junlin lifted Shen Yu's chin and said in an unclear tone, "Do you remember, you?" Shen Yu looked at Shang Junlin and faintly felt that he seemed to be angry. He stopped and turned to look at Shang Junlin. "If it weren't for this accident, I wouldn't have been able to see such a beautiful sunrise with your majesty." "Your majesty, don't think about those unhappy things. Look ahead, how beautiful it is." A huge red sun was slowly rising. Not far from the prison of the Ministry of Justice, a silent battle gradually came to an end. The leader of the Imperial Guards wiped the blood on his face and ordered in a hoarse voice, "See if there are any survivors." Their purpose was not only to eliminate the people hiding in the dark trying to rescue the King of Yu, but also to find the mastermind behind these people. They had deliberately let down their guard in order to give the mastermind an opportunity to fish out the biggest fish behind the scenes. In an inconspicuous house in the suburbs of the capital, a man in a navy blue robe wore a black mask that covered his entire face. Two men in black knelt respectfully in front of him. "It's dawn, and they haven't returned yet." The man in the navy blue robe spoke. His voice was hoarse, and it was impossible to determine his age based on his voice alone. "I've already arranged for people to receive them." The man snorted coldly, "Don't come back with nothing but some things that shouldn't be brought back." Bang! As they spoke, a loud noise came from outside the house. The expressions of the three people in the house changed slightly. One of the men in black said, "I'll go out and take a look." The man had an ominous premonition in his heart. He shouldn't have come on this trip. According to his usual style, no matter what happened, he would leave it to his subordinates. However, because he helped the King of Yu's rebellion, he lost too many people in his hands. In addition, the imperial court was constantly sending people to capture his people. Many of his strongholds were destroyed, and his influence was sharply reduced. For a time, he was in a predicament where there was no one he could use. For the sake of the King of Yu, he had already paid too much. No matter what, he couldn't just watch the King of Yu be killed. The forces he had developed were either captured or destroyed. There weren't many that could be used. Even if he didn't act personally this time, it wouldn't be long before those people followed the clues to find him. After weighing the pros and cons, there was only one viable option left. Thus, he took the remaining elite forces and went in the opposite direction, coming to the capital. He didn't have much power in his hands, but that didn't mean that he didn't have any other power that he could use. The premise was that he could save the King of Yu safely. Without the King of Yu, he couldn't activate those forces. This was also the reason why he had tried to save the King of Yu. After half an hour, there was no movement outside. The man became more and more flustered. Deathly silence spread, as if it was the last calm before the storm. Shen Yu rubbed the teacup in his hand, his voice very soft. "I want to know who has such great malice towards me." Chapter 191. If this happened in his previous life, Shen Yu could understand. He had made a lot of enemies in his previous life, and there were as many people who wanted him dead as carps crossing the river. But in this life, he had entered the palace without doing anything. Even if he had made enemies, it was too late. It might not be because of Yu. Shang Junlin felt that in the end, this matter was very likely because of him. He had been on the throne for so many years, and there were many people who hated him. Even before he ascended the throne, there were many people who wanted him dead. Although those who took action were dealt with by him, it was inevitable that there would be fish that escaped the net. "Your Majesty, can I go and see the assassin?" Shen Yu wanted to make sure whether the assassin was coming for him. If so, was there a backup plan? Shen Yu didn't like to feel a sense of crisis at the last moment. If he wanted to do something, he had to nip all the dangers in the bud. Shang Junlin thought of the appearance of the dancer when he left, and his voice was slightly hesitant. Wait for 2 days. Shin Yu only wanted to see the assassin once. Hearing this, he nodded and thought of another matter. Your Majesty, why did you come out so quickly? Have you finished your discussion? Of course not. After Shang Junlin received the news that Shin Yu had come, he dropped the half-discussed matter and came out to see him. Anyway, those matters couldn't be resolved in a short time, and the ministers could continue their discussion after he left. The ministers didn't expect that Shang Junlin would suddenly leave in the middle of their discussion. They looked at each other. Does your Majesty have something important to say? Eunuch Meng laughed dryly and didn't know how to answer. It was impossible for him to not report Shin Yu's arrival. Otherwise, he would be the one to suffer. However, he didn't expect that His Majesty would directly abandon the minister and leave. Looking at Eunuch Meng's expression, the Prime Minister guessed something and said to draw everyone's attention, His Majesty must have something to do, so he left in a hurry. Let's continue. As Shang Junlin said, without him present, the ministers could continue their discussion as usual. The Prime Minister and Fang Jun controlled the topic. They were discussing matters related to the assassination this time. Unlike the last time, the assassination was carried out in the palace and involved more people and a greater variety of people. Shin Yu didn't want to delay Shang Junlin for too long, but Shang Junlin refused to go back alone, so he had no choice but to go with him. When the ministers saw that Shang Junlin went out and brought back Shin Yu, they all widened their eyes. Only the Prime Minister and Fang Jun had a hint of understanding in their eyes. Your subjects greet your Majesty, Your Highness. Regardless of what they were thinking, they all stood up and saluted the moment they saw them. You don't have to be so courteous. Shang Junlin hugged Shin Yu and sat down on the main seat. Some of the ministers saw this scene and opened their mouths, wanting to say something. This matter involves Your Highness. I think Your Highness has the right to know everything. They slandered Your Highness for no reason, so there must be a reason. My dear ministers, what do you think this reason is? Shang Junlin made the first move, so the ministers' thoughts were led away by him. They no longer thought about whether it was appropriate for Shin Yu, as Your Highness, to appear here or not. Your subject thinks that we can start from the people around Your Highness to see if they have a grudge with Your Highness in the past. Plotting to murder Your Majesty is a serious crime. No matter whether Your Highness really did it or not, as long as you are suspicious, you will be estranged from Your Majesty. The minister who spoke glanced at Shang Junlin and slowly looked away. Of course, Your Majesty and Your Highness have a strong relationship and are not deceived by outsiders. This assassination can be said to be killing 2 birds with 1 stone. No matter whether it succeeds or not, Your Highness will be implicated. Your subject thinks that the person who planned this must have had a conflict with Your Highness. Your subject may ask, Your Highness, can you think of any suspicious person? Shin Yu had been thinking for a long time, but there was no result. Otherwise, he would not have wanted to see the dancer. Until the leader of the Imperial Guards and the leader of the Hidden Dragon Guards came to report, they did not come up with any useful results. The person behind King Yu has been caught. Shin Yu could not believe it when he suddenly received the news that the person behind King Yu had been caught. I sent the Hidden Dragon Guards and the Imperial Guards to act together. They split into 2 groups and finally caught the person. This arrest had been planned for a long time. It started from the first time King Yu was locked up in the dark prison. After almost a year, they finally succeeded. Congratulations, Your Highness, for getting what you wanted. It's all thanks to you. Shang Junlin hugged Shin Yu and kissed him on the forehead. Now that the person behind King Yu had been caught, Shang Junlin had more things to do. The trap that the late emperor had set for Shang Junlin before his death was finally solved. The person behind the scenes was locked up alone in the dark prison. In order to prevent any accidents from happening, the prison was heavily guarded. Shang Junlin transferred people from the Ministry of Justice and the Supreme Court to deal with this matter together. On one hand, there was an assassination, and on the other hand, there was a rebellion. The ministers were so busy because of these two matters that they did not even have time to rest. Duke Shenbei was dismissed from his position and stayed at home. Naturally, he did not attend the palace banquet. When he heard the news of the emperor's assassination, it had already been 2 days. "Duke, I heard some news from outside. I don't know if it's true or not." After the discussion, one of Duke Shenbei's trusted aides said hesitantly. "What news?" Duke Shenbei looked a lot older because he was dismissed from his position. "It's about Guijun." The trusted aide lowered his voice. "I got the news from the palace. It said that this assassination has something to do with Guijun. There's a saying that it was Guijun who ordered this assassination." "Nonsense." Duke Shenbei slammed the table hard. "Duke, don't be angry. It's not groundless. It said that on the night of the assassination, Guijun threw a cup for no reason. That's why a dancer who was performing a dance was killed." Duke Shenbei fell silent and wiped his face tiredly. What did His Majesty say about this? His Majesty suppressed the news and ordered people not to spread it. Whether this is true or not, it's extremely unfavorable to the Duke's mansion. I know that Shin Yu would not do such a thing. There must be some misunderstanding. If the assassination was true, it would bring disaster to the 9 generations. Duke Shenbei stood by the window and watched the sun slowly set. He suddenly remembered something that happened many years ago. Just at this time, the trusted aide spoke again. "I'm worried that this matter might be related to the forces that Madam mentioned in the past. If it's really related to them, I'm afraid that there will be endless troubles in the future." Saying that there would be troubles was not a big deal. The accusation of assassination was obviously to send everyone to a dead end. "Let's wait and see. If it doesn't work, I'll go to the palace." The 2 people in the room didn't notice that a corner of clothes flashed in the corridor outside the room. Shen Qingran passed by here by accident. He didn't expect that he would hear such a big secret. Of course, he hoped that Shen Yu's fate would be miserable. The more miserable, the better. But the premise was that he would not be implicated. He had been in this era for many years. He knew that ancient times were different from modern times. He and Shin Yu had the same father but different mothers. If Shin Yu committed the crime of exterminating the 9 generations, he would not be able to escape. He didn't want to die with Shin Yu at all. When he heard that Shang Junlin had suppressed the matter, Shen Qingran felt relieved. At the same time, there was a strong jealousy. Why could Shin Yu have the best of everything? After entering the palace, he was doted on alone. Now, the high and mighty emperor was willing to suppress the news of the assassination for him. Jealousy was like a poisonous snake gnawing at his heart. Shen Qingran wanted to destroy everything, but he couldn't do anything. Shen Qingran woke up in the middle of the night. He found a person wrapped in a black robe standing by his bed. "Who are you?" "Who I am is not important. What's important is that I can fulfill your wish. Do you want to replace Shin Yu's position? It should be you who entered the palace. Why did Shin Yu get all the benefits?" A hoarse voice came from the hood, carrying with it a strange and bewitching power. Shen Qingran was not bewitched. He stared at him with vigilance. "What do you want to do?" "I can help you replace Shin Yu's position, as long as you agree to a small request of mine. You can do it just because you say you can. Don't fool me like I'm a 3-year-old child." Shen Qingran wanted to replace Shin Yu's position, but he wouldn't believe what others said. If it was in the past, he might have foolishly believed it. Now, he only believed in himself. "You said that you can help me replace Shin Yu's position. Presumably, other people can do it too." Go find someone else. Compared to me, there are a lot of people in the capital who want that position. After that, he covered his head with the quilt. Apparently, he didn't want to continue the conversation. The black-robed man stared at him for a while. Then, he gave a light hum and left. Everything that happened in Count North's residence was passed to Shen Yu's ears through Yinhua. Yinhua was the name Shen Yu gave to his force. It was mainly responsible for delivering information for Shen Yu. In his previous life, Yinhua was developed to the extreme in Shen Yu's hands. Their intelligence network was spread all over the world, which was very convenient for King Yu. In this life, Shen Yu returned to the time when Yinhua was still in its embryonic form. Everything had to start from scratch. Fortunately, Shen Yu didn't lack time. After a year of development, and with the experience of his previous life, Yinhua grew very fast. Shen Yu sent people to the northern desert with Jiang Huiqing. In addition to protection, the other purpose was to root Yinhua in the northern desert. You mean, you didn't track down the black-robed man? Shen Yu played with a red plum in his hand. Mu Shi lowered her head, yes. That man appeared suddenly and disappeared suddenly. Our people lost track of him. Shen Yu put the red plum into the white porcelain vase. Pay more attention to the people around Shen Qingran. In this world, as long as something has existed, it will leave traces. What Yinhua needs to do is to find the person according to these traces. I understand. Shen Yu played with the white porcelain vase on the table. Is it beautiful? Mu Shi smiled. It has been done by the young master. How can it not be beautiful? When Shang Junlin came back, he found that there was a touch of red in the bedchamber. Shen Yu followed his gaze and looked. It's the red plum that His Majesty brought back. A Yu is clever and skillful. He should be rewarded. After dinner, Shang Junlin took Shen Yu for a walk outside. A Yu said that he wants to see the assassin. He can do it today. Shen Yu asked, did Lord Fong and the others find out anything? Shang Junlin's gaze fell on Shen Yu. They found out something. The assassin confessed that the person behind the scenes arranged the assassination not to kill me, but to put the crime of assassination on a Yu. These days, I have been thinking about who has such a big grudge against me that they didn't hesitate to plan an assassination just to frame me. I didn't expect that they would hate me so much. Your Majesty, do you still remember the person who was treated as an assassin by you when you first met me? I'm wondering if there is any connection between the two. Shen Yu kicked away the stone beside his feet. Shang Junlin frowned. A Yu means that the people who are targeting you are the same group of people. After a round of questioning, Fong Jun seemed to have gotten something out of her, but at the same time, he seemed to have gotten nothing out of her. Fong Jun explained, this woman seems to have undergone special training. It took me a lot of effort to pry open her mouth. When they came out of the dark prison, Shen Yu suddenly thought of Zhu Wang, who was also locked up in the dark prison. He pulled Shang Junlin's sleeve. What's wrong? Your Majesty, send someone to check Zhu Wang's attitude. Zhu Wang has an old grudge with my mother. Maybe we can get some clues from him. Okay. Shang Junlin called the hidden dragon guards and whispered a few instructions. When they came out of the dark prison, the sun was blocked by the dark clouds. Shen Yu looked at the sky. It seems like it's going to rain. Sure enough, after the horse carriage traveled for a while, it started to rain. The rain got heavier and the sky got darker. Seeing that the rain would not stop anytime soon, Shang Junlin ordered them to find a place to take shelter from the rain. The sun was shining just now, and now it's raining so heavily. Shen Yu lifted the curtain and looked outside. After receiving Shang Junlin's order, the horse carriage turned around and drove to another place. They found a house nearby to take shelter from the rain. The road from the palace to the dark prison was very remote. The people who lived nearby were not high officials or nobles. Eunuch Meng chose a house nearby. The owner of the house was very kind. When he heard that they were here to take shelter from the rain, he quickly welcomed them in. Shen Yu and Shang Junlin were wearing casual clothes when they left the palace. Although their identities could not be identified, it was not difficult to tell from their clothes and actions that they were not ordinary people. There was only a woman in the house. According to the woman, all the men in the house went out to do business. Usually, she was the only one at home. "Young masters, please drink some tea to warm your body." The woman brought out some hot tea from the house and placed it in front of Shen Yu and Shang Junlin. "Thank you, Auntie." Shen Yu picked up the teacup and took a sip. The weather is really changeable. The sun was shining just now, and now it's raining so heavily. I don't know if my husband got caught in the rain. The woman looked at the rain outside the house with a worried expression. Shen Yu found a lot of unfinished umbrellas in the house. He guessed that the business the woman was talking about was selling umbrellas. Shen Yu sat for a while and felt a little cold. He slowly moved to Shang Junlin's side and said in a low voice, "Your Majesty, I'm a little cold." The outside of the palace was not like the inside of the palace. When they were in the palace, wherever Shen Yu went, the ground would be heated up. Their house was obviously not in such a good condition. "I couldn't wake you up," Shang Junlin frowned. "Imperial physician Gu came to check on you. He said that your vitality was damaged during this period of time. Sleeping more is good for recovery." Shang Junlin didn't mention how flustered he was last night. Shen Yu could roughly guess. He touched his face with his other hand. "Thank you for your hard work, Your Majesty." After applying the medicine, Shang Junlin handed the medicine bottle to Eunuch Meng who had been waiting beside him. "You, give me a kiss and I won't be tired." "Okay, Your Majesty, come closer." Shen Yu raised the corner of his mouth. Shang Junlin followed his words and leaned over. A soft kiss fell on the corner of his lips. Shang Junlin caught the young man who slipped away after kissing him and kissed him back deeply. The palace servant quietly retreated. Shen Yu raised his head. His injured wrist was shackled by the man. His strong arm restrained his waist, making it impossible for him to retreat. "What are you doing, Your Majesty?" Shen Yu felt the restraint on his wrist. He turned his head to avoid the man's kiss and looked at his wrist. He didn't know when, but his two wrists were tied together with red silk. It wasn't tied tightly, but it was just enough to prevent him from breaking free. His snow-white wrists were tied with red silk, which made his skin look even fairer. It was tempting to leave his mark on it. The imperial physician said that a Yu's hands can't be used too much strength. "They can't touch water," Shang Junlin said in a low and hoarse voice. "A Yu can bite me if he can't bear it." "Don't use your hands to grab." Shen Yu's warm breath brushed past her ear. She unconsciously curled her body. His hands couldn't be used, which made everything that followed more difficult. Shen Yu bit the man's shoulder to vent his anger, leaving a deep bite mark. The man seemed to feel no pain, or it could be said that he was stimulated by his actions and became more and more excited. Shen Yu tilted his head and kissed the side of his face, lingering. "A Yu?" Shen Yu's energy, which had been recuperating for an entire night, was exhausted again. When it was over, Shang Junlin held him in his arms and untied the red silk on his wrists. Even though Shen Yu struggled a little during the process, only a shallow red mark was left on his wrists. Shen Yu curiously touched the red silk. He didn't know what kind of cloth it was made of, but it was very soft and smooth. "What kind of cloth is this?" Shen Yu observed the red silk in his hands. It looked like silk, but it wasn't exactly the same. It was softer and more flexible than silk, and it was very comfortable to touch. The red silk passed through his slender fingers, which made his hands look fairer. Shang Junlin's eyes darkened as he held the red silk and Shen Yu's hands together. I asked Meng Chang to find it from the storehouse. Shang Junlin rubbed the skin on Shen Yu's wrists. Meng Chang found several bolts. If Yu likes it, I asked Meng Chang to send it to Yuzhang Palace. Your Majesty used such a good cloth to tie my hands? Shen Yu cast a sidelong glance at him. Red suits Yu very well. I asked the clothing bureau to make clothes for Yu to wear for me. How about it? Shen Yu was about to say something, but Shang Junlin slowly added, you can only wear it for me to see. Chapter 193. Your Majesty, why do you care who I wear my clothes for? Because this kind of cloth is most suitable to be made into close-fitting clothes. Naturally, it can only be shown to me, Shang Junlin answered seriously. Shen Yu pinched his arm. Your Majesty, why don't you ask the clothing bureau to make it for you? Yu reminded me. When the time comes, I will ask the clothing bureau to make a set for me and Yu to wear it together. Your Majesty also wears red. Shen Yu raised his head and looked at Shang Junlin. He rarely saw Shang Junlin wearing any color other than black. In fact, Shang Junlin was very suitable for black. The man was tall and had a cold face. When he wore a black imperial robe, he had an oppressive aura. Shen Yu liked Shang Junlin very much. However, this didn't prevent him from wanting to see Shang Junlin wearing other colors. Different colors gave people different feelings. Shen Yu imagined Shang Junlin wearing a red robe. It would definitely bring a different sensory stimulation. Yu wants to see me wearing red. Shen Yu nodded. I allow it. Shen Yu was stunned for a moment. Then he realized that Shang Junlin was talking about wearing a red robe. Commoners all wear red when they get married. It's normal for Yu to like it. Your Majesty, why did you suddenly mention this? I just thought that Your Majesty would definitely look good in red. What does it have to do with commoners getting married? Shang Junlin smiled but didn't say anything. Shen Yu raised his hand. Speaking of which, on the day I entered the palace, Your Majesty also wore a black robe. Shang Junlin grabbed his hand and kissed it. Yes, most of the imperial robes are black. The details are slightly different. On that day, the robes were embroidered with red and gold threads. At that time, Shen Yu had just entered the palace, so he didn't pay attention to these things. Later, because he fainted, he didn't pay attention to these things. Thinking of this, he opened his mouth and asked, when I entered the palace, I suddenly fainted. Was it related to the person who arranged this assassination? It had been a year since the incident. Shang Junlin didn't talk about it, and Shen Yu didn't ask about it either. It wasn't until later that he encountered a similar incident in the Tsangxi mountain. I originally thought that they were targeting Yu because of me. Now, it seems like that's not the case. No, I should say that it's not completely the case. I've already investigated the person who did it that day. According to the confession, the person who's more suspicious is the person standing behind King Yu. However, I can't rule out the possibility that what Yu said is true. Shang Junlin's memory of that night was especially vivid. After changing more than half of the palace staff in Yuzhang Palace, the same thing never happened again. Maybe I'm thinking too much. Unless they can predict the future and predict that I'll enter the palace and set up an ambush early in the palace. The palace is not like other places. If they set up an ambush at the last minute, it will definitely attract the attention of others. Shen Yu denied this conjecture. The person behind King Yu has been caught. I've handed the person over to Fang Jun. In a few days, there should be a result. This year's New Year is really chaos. Not only did the ministers not enjoy the New Year's holiday that they should have, but they were also busy every day because of various things. Among them, the 3 cabinet ministers were the most mentally and physically exhausted. Needless to say, the Prime Minister and Shang Junlin would hand over everything to them. The other cabinet minister, who was born in an aristocratic family, also needed to be busy with various things. Almost everything that happened in the imperial court had to go through the cabinet ministers, including King Yu's rebellion and the palace banquet assassination. Although Shang Junlin had handed the matter over to the Prime Minister and Fang Jun, it did not mean that Duan Daren could completely stay out of it. What should be understood and what should be followed up, nothing could be left behind. Because these 2 matters involved too much, the aristocratic family officials and the humble family officials had to put down their grudges and deal with this matter together first. Political fights were fine, but after these troubles were solved, they would stop fighting. Without the upper-level officials who were in cahoots with the Northern Desert people, the atmosphere in the officialdom changed. Although there were some small conflicts, the overall atmosphere was still very harmonious. He Qingyu, Fang Jie, and the others quickly gained a foothold in the Northern Desert. Jiang Huiqing should have been like them, shining in the Northern Desert. However, the emperor gave a secret order, so he had to change his appearance, hide his identity, and go to the Northern Desert. Other than He Qingyu, no one else knew about this for the time being. The assassination had not yet spread to the Northern Desert, but the news of the King of Yu's rebellion had already spread throughout the Great Huan. The movements of the imperial court were too big, so it was hard not to know. Especially after the King of Yu and the people behind him were arrested, the imperial court had no more misgivings. They issued orders everywhere to encircle and annihilate the remnants of the rebels. If they encountered them, they could be executed on the spot. There were also remnants of these people in the Subei army. He Qingyu had borrowed a small group of soldiers from the Subei army to begin a search in the territory of the Subei army. Under his and Jiang Huiqing's cooperation, they had successfully dealt with quite a few of the forces that the imperial court had ordered to exterminate. Sometimes, He Qingyu and Jiang Huiqing would work together with the Northern Desert Army. The Northern Desert officials were used to the 2 of them disappearing together and reappearing together a few days later. They thought that the 2 of them were trying to accumulate more merits, so the officials who were on good terms with the 2 of them often teased them. But no one knew that their true goal was to make Jiang Huiqing disappear from the public eye for a while. Jiang Huiqing hadn't been in the Northern Desert for long and hadn't done anything particularly eye-catching. Others might not have paid much attention to his sudden disappearance, but the officials who had come with him were different, especially those who had a certain degree of friendship with him. Jiang Huiqing's departure this time wasn't just a day or 2. It was easy to cover up for a short period of time, but it was easy to raise suspicions if it took too long. Thus, they arranged a play. A play where one person was seriously injured and one person substituted for the other. As usual, He Qingyu and Jiang Huiqing led the Northern Desert Army together. Less than 2 days later, He Qingyu appeared at the entrance of the yamen, carrying the bloodied Jiang Huiqing. What's going on? The young official who had just been demoted didn't have time to think. He hurriedly called for people to come forward and help Jiang Huiqing out of He Qingyu's arms. Several people helped He Qingyu into the yamen. Quickly call a doctor. After a busy period, the 2 were settled down. The officials also learned the whole story from He Qingyu, who was still conscious. They had misjudged and were injured by the traitors. He Qingyu's injury was relatively light, so it didn't affect his work after being bandaged. Jiang Huiqing's injury was more serious. After the doctor examined him, he was still unconscious. Huiqing was injured so badly because he took a hit from me. This was the first time the usually steady person had shown a side of panic. The officials who were familiar with them were very uncomfortable. Jiang Daren is blessed by the heavens. Nothing will happen to him. Yes, we'll invite the best doctor in the Northern Desert. If it really doesn't work, we'll submit a memorial and ask His Majesty to send an imperial physician. Don't worry too much. Nothing will happen. You're also injured. Take care of yourself. I know, Qingyu wiped his face. The man who had always cared about his image couldn't hide his disappointment. Since Huiqing was injured because of me, I should take good care of him before he recovers. I'll bring him to my fu and take care of him until he recovers. Everyone knew that he had a good relationship with Jiang Huiqing. After something like this happened, he must be upset. Seeing that he wanted to bring Jiang Huiqing back to his fu, they didn't dissuade him. What's more, he was willing. What was the use of dissuading him? It would be annoying for no reason. Like this, Qingyu brought Jiang Huiqing back to his fu. Along with him was the doctor who treated Jiang Huiqing. No one noticed that a few days later, an inconspicuous carriage drove out of the side door of Hifu. Inside the carriage was the heavily injured and unconscious Jiang Huiqing. The carriage drove all the way to an inconspicuous residence outside the city and stopped. Jiang Huiqing dismounted. Inside was the person who had been waiting for him for a long time. Sir, the travel permit and the relevant documents have been prepared. Jiang Huiqing changed his clothes and fixed his appearance. After half an hour, he looked at himself in the bronze mirror. It was both familiar and unfamiliar. Your Excellency, when you reach the northern desert, you can take the token and go to this place. There will be people waiting for you there. If you need anything, you can send the people there. This is a map of the northern desert. We have marked the places with our people. Jiang Huiqing memorized the places marked on the map. When he set off, he didn't bring it with him. Some things were safer to keep in mind than to bring it with you. The news of the northern desert was sent back to the capital through the hidden dragon guards. Shen Yu also received news of the northern desert from Yinghua. Who came up with this idea? First impressions are the strongest. Let others see that he was seriously injured. Then, in the name of recuperating, he lived in seclusion. This greatly reduced the possibility of suspicion. It was Qingyu. He submitted a memorial to ask for forgiveness. Shang Junlin took out a memorial from a stack of memorials and handed it to Shen Yu. Jiang Huiqing told him about the plan. Shen Yu flipped open the memorial and skimmed through it. He didn't say it clearly, but Qingyu guessed it. That's right. I asked the hidden dragon guards to keep an eye on him. If he does anything. Shang Junlin's voice turned cold. Shen Yu didn't doubt that if Qingyu did something that he shouldn't do, Shang Junlin would directly order the hidden dragon guards to punish him. Shen Yu placed the memorial back on the table. He thought of something else and said, since your majesty sent Jiang Huiqing to do this, you must have confirmed that there is no problem with Jiang Huiqing's identity. Your majesty, can you tell me what you found out? His background is very simple. It's no different from what we found out previously. If you insist on it, his teacher seems to have been an official in the imperial court. During the time of the previous emperor, the imperial court was very chaotic. There were many officials who resigned or were dismissed. For now, we can't confirm which kind of teacher his teacher was. Oh. Shen Yu lowered his eyes and pondered. Although Jiang Huiqing was his right-hand man in his previous life, Shen Yu didn't know much about his past. Chapter 194. The late emperor had passed away, and everything that happened in the past had dissipated like smoke. It was very difficult to figure out this problem. After all, no one was the late emperor himself, so no one knew what he was thinking. Shang Junlin also knew that it was useless to think too much about this problem, so he quickly returned to the topic. This Grand Tutor Zhang, I have had contact with him before. He was a rare good official. When the late emperor was not so absurd, they had a harmonious relationship. Later, the late emperor believed in treacherous officials, and their relationship slowly drifted apart. I also remember that this Grand Tutor Zhang had a good reputation among the people. After he was killed by treacherous officials, many people spontaneously worshipped him. There was even a great scholar who wrote an article saying that the last light in the imperial court had been extinguished. This matter was widely discussed in the capital. Even Shen Yu, who lived deep in the marquis mansion, heard a thing or two. Later on, Shen Yu had his own power and roughly understood what happened in the imperial court. His memory of Grand Tutor Zheng was especially deep. Shang Junlin, if he didn't die at that time, then the authenticity of the murder has yet to be investigated. The late emperor did kill many people in the imperial court for him, including treacherous officials and some innocent people. Shen Yu, what about the dossier from that year? What was written on it? Shang Junlin, after Fang Jun found out the identity of the person behind the scenes, he immediately went to look at the dossier. The records were just like what I said before. Grand Tutor Zheng was already a dead man. Shen Yu, no wonder we couldn't find him before. A dead person naturally wouldn't be placed on the list of suspects. When Grand Tutor Zheng died, Your Majesty had already stood out in the imperial court. Could it be that the late emperor began to suspect him at that time? How did he know who would ascend the throne in the end? Shang Junlin, I spent most of my time at the border, so I didn't know much about the late emperor's thoughts. When the incident with Grand Tutor Zheng happened, I was far away at the border. When I came back, everything was already settled. As for the backup plans left behind by the late emperor, I didn't know about them at first. It was only after the assassination attempt that I slowly found out that the things the late emperor left behind were far more than I imagined. Shen Yu, according to what you said, if he wanted to appoint the Prince of Yu as the new monarch, he could have given the position of crown prince to him in advance. But he didn't. From beginning to end, Emperor Xian never agreed to appoint a crown prince. If there was another crown prince, it would be much more troublesome for Shang Junlin to inherit the throne. However, the previous emperor didn't. As the only legitimate son of the previous emperor, Shang Junlin naturally inherited the throne of the Great Huan dynasty. Not to mention, he also had outstanding military achievements and held most of the military power in the Great Huan dynasty. The other princes were no match for him. Moreover, Grand Tutor Zheng, why didn't Teacher Tan and the others know his true identity? Why was he never willing to show his true face in front of his subordinates? Because he couldn't. If a dead person reappeared in the world, it would definitely attract a lot of unnecessary trouble. How did Lord Fang find out his true identity? Also, he shouldn't have used his original appearance. Shen Yu asked. If Grand Tutor Zheng had used his original appearance, he should have been recognized when he was first caught. Although it had been more than 10 years since the incident, Grand Tutor Zheng had left a deep impression in the hearts of the people. When Lord Fang had just entered the imperial court, Grand Tutor Zheng was still active in the court. It was said that Lord Fang had almost entered Grand Tutor Zheng's tutelage. This matter was also a coincidence. It just so happened that on the day Fang Jun was interrogated, an imperial physician came to the prison to test medicine and saw traces of the medicine used on Grand Tutor Zheng's face. After his appearance recovered, Fang Jun recognized him at a glance. Didn't Lord Fang get a fright? No matter who saw a person who should have been dead for many years appear in front of them, it was impossible for them to remain calm. Yes, if it weren't for this incident, the true identity of the person behind the scenes wouldn't have been so easy to find out. After the true identity of the person behind the scenes was announced, the entire imperial court was shocked. Those who entered the imperial court as officials more or less knew a bit about the previous emperor's era, not to mention the shocking matter of Grand Tutor Zheng. What kind of person was Grand Tutor Zheng? He was a clear stream in the later years of the previous emperor's reign, a good official praised by countless scholars and literati. Now that they were told that Grand Tutor Zheng stood behind the King of Yu and helped him plot a rebellion, many people's first reaction was disbelief. Is there some kind of misunderstanding? Grand Tutor Zhang lived an honest life and worked hard for the Great Han dynasty. After being demoted, he was killed by a traitor. Now, you're saying that he's not dead. Not only is he not dead, but he also committed serious crimes such as assassination and rebellion. I don't understand, why? Why do you have so many whys? If you want to know, you can go to the Ministry of Justice's prison and ask him. Maybe you can get some useful information from him. The ministers of the imperial court, including Fang Jun, were all deeply puzzled. Unlike the others, Fang Jun could ask the person in question face to face. In the Ministry of Justice's prison, Grand Tutor Zhang was tied to a pillar. Fang Jun sat across from him, his mood complicated. He had once envied Grand Tutor Zhang's character, fantasizing that if Grand Tutor Zhang hadn't been killed by a traitor, the turmoil in the Great Han dynasty would have been reduced. Now, this person had really appeared in front of him again, but in such a way. Grand Tutor, why are you doing this? Fang Jun used the previous address. Grand Tutor. Grand Tutor Zhang was in a daze. It's been a long time since someone called me that. Why are you doing this? I'm just following orders. Whose orders? Fang Jun frowned. Other than the previous emperor, who else could it be? Grand Tutor Zhang laughed softly, his voice hoarse. Was it the previous emperor who asked you to overturn the Great Han dynasty? Why would he do this? Fang Jun didn't understand. Who knows? He's the ruler and I'm the subject. I have to obey his orders, don't I? Just like right now, no matter what Shang Junlin wants you to do, no matter how outrageous it is, you can only do it. Grand Tutor Zhang's expression was strange, as if he was laughing, but also as if he was mocking something. Fang Jun's expression turned serious. His Majesty is His Majesty. He wouldn't do anything to harm the Great Han dynasty. Right now, this official is interrogating you. Don't involve other places. What orders did the previous emperor give you? Don't you already know? To help the king of you ascend the throne. Grand Tutor Zhang's mocking smile widened. Why does official Fang keep asking? I already told you, but you don't believe me. Then tell me, what crime does your emperor want to accuse me of? What do you want me to confess? Fang Jun wasn't angered, his voice still calm. Is the He family also your people? You mean the He family that was stupid enough to send their entire family to prison? Grand Tutor Zhang sneered, just a stupid dog. Why did they attack Gui Jun? Fang Jun glanced at him without emotion. Don't tell me this was also the previous emperor's order. You've already said everything. What else does official Fang want me to say? This interrogation seemed to have yielded a lot of information, but in reality, there was very little that was useful. After sorting out the confession and the interrogation process, Fang Jun sent it to the Imperial Palace. Imperial Study. Fang Jun knelt on the ground. Eunuch Meng took the confession from his hands and handed it to Shang Junlin with both hands. Shang Junlin picked up the confession, opened it, and read 10 lines at a glance. His eyes darkened slightly. Make arrangements, Zhen wants to see him. Your Majesty. Fang Jun raised his head in surprise. Shang Junlin rubbed the confession in his hands, his voice without the slightest trace of emotion. There are some things that Zhen wants to confirm personally. Fang Jun knew that once Shang Junlin made up his mind, he would not be swayed by others, so he swallowed the words of dissuasion that were on the tip of his tongue. This subject obeys. Fang Jun went to the Ministry of Justice in advance to make arrangements. The Minister of Justice walked beside him and was quite puzzled. Why does Your Majesty suddenly want to come? How can we, as subjects, interfere with what Your Majesty wants to do? Fang Jun did not turn his head and continued to make arrangements. No, the Minister of Justice's tone was anxious. This person planned and tried to rebel. If this lowly official is saying if something happens to Your Majesty, can you and I bear the responsibility? Therefore, we have to make arrangements in advance and nip all possible dangers in the bud. Don't you think that if His Majesty does not come, all the dangers can be nipped at the source? The Minister of Justice said faintly. Fong Jun stopped. Then you will send a memorial to persuade His Majesty. Forget it, let's make arrangements. The Minister of Justice wiped his face and joined Fong Jun's action. The Ministry of Justice was busy because they would soon welcome the Emperor. I always feel that there is something neglected in this matter. I plan to meet Grand Tutor Xing in person. In Yuzhong Palace, Shang Junlin told Shen Yu about his plan. Prince Yu is also locked up in the Ministry of Justice, right? Shen Yu poured a cup of tea for Shang Junlin. Your Majesty, try it. It's new tea that was just delivered. Shang Junlin took the teacup and took a sip. Yes, why is Yu suddenly asking about him? The person behind the scenes has been caught. Shouldn't Your Majesty deal with Prince Yu? Shen Yu's hand that was holding the teacup tightened. Yes, he was kept to lure out the person behind the scenes. Now that the person has been caught, there is no need to keep him. Shang Junlin did not have any good impression of Prince Yu. After listening to Shang Junlin's words, Shen Yu fell silent. Noticing his strangeness, Shang Junlin put down the teacup, lifted Shen Yu's chin, and said in a dangerous voice, Yu is not happy. Shen Yu shook his head. I always feel that things are going too smoothly. After going through so much trouble to catch the person, it was not smooth. Shen Yu also knew this, but he was a little uneasy. Don't think too much. I won't let him escape again. Shang Junlin let go of his hand and stood up. I heard from the Ministry of Justice that Shang Junyue's situation is not good now. If Yu is really concerned, then go with me. When does Your Majesty plan to go? In 2 days. Shen Yu stood up and walked to Shang Junlin's side. Does Prince Yu know that the person supporting him is Grand Tutor Xing? Shang Junlin, it seems that he doesn't know. He only knows that the former emperor left him a lot of things. But so far, only a small part of these things has reached his hands. According to his confession, he was forced to revolt this time. Among the troops that were wiped out, less than 10% listened to his orders. Chen Yu, from the looks of it, rather than saying that the King of Yu is rebelling, it's better to say that the person behind the King of Yu is using his name to raise an army. If that's the case, Grand Tutor Zhang's true purpose is open for discussion. Is he really doing all this just to send the King of Yu to the throne? Definitely not. Shang Junlin would never easily believe a person's words. Perhaps in the past, he simply obeyed the orders of the late emperor and took the opportunity to assist the King of Yu in ascending the throne. However, after holding power for so many years, no one can guarantee that his thoughts haven't changed. Power was the thing that could change a person's mind the most. Chapter 195. Your Majesty, are you saying that Grand Tutor Xing is disloyal? There is indeed such a possibility. If our conjecture is correct, the people left behind by the previous emperor are for Grand Tutor Xing to order around. For a person who has always been in charge of his own affairs to suddenly hand over the power in his hands, he definitely wouldn't be so willing. Shen Yu thought of the mysterious force that appeared beside King Yu in his previous life. He used to think that the force helped King Yu because he saved young Master He. It seemed that he was wrong from the beginning. The force helped because Shang Junue was King Yu. Young Master He was just an excuse to fool them and even King Yu. In his previous life, he had been by King Yu's side, dealing with all kinds of matters for him. He was sure that the mysterious faction had never revealed themselves, and the person behind the scenes had never appeared. Moreover, from King Yu's attitude, it was not hard to see that he was extremely respectful to that person, and there was even a trace of undetectable fear. Shen Yu felt that King Yu might not know who the real master of the mysterious force that helped him was until the end. If you want to confirm it, you will know when you see the person. Shang Junlin said lightly. The date of going to the Ministry of Justice was 3 days later. These days, Shen Yu had asked the people of Yinghua to pay attention to the movements of Count North's residents, especially Shen Qingran. As the protagonist of the story, Shen Yu would not take it lightly. There was nothing unusual in Count North's residence for the time being. 3 days passed in the blink of an eye. Shen Yu changed into casual clothes and got on the carriage to the Ministry of Justice with Shang Junlin. This trip was light and not many people knew about it. The Minister of Justice had prepared in advance. When they arrived, he directly led the carriage to the prison. Who's the person sitting in the carriage? Why is the minister personally leading the carriage? Under the eaves, several low-ranking officials saw this scene and were curious. No matter who it is, you and I can't casually talk about him. Shen Yu sat in the carriage. The Minister of Justice reported the progress of the case to Shang Junlin outside the carriage. Shang Junlin held Shen Yu's hand and whispered in his ear, "Today, I will vent your anger for you." What? Shen Yu did not react for a while. Will you be afraid? Shang Junlin did not answer Shen Yu's question. Shen Yu was even more confused. Afraid of what? Your Majesty is talking about what will happen later. Yes, interrogation of the prisoner may be tortured. Your Majesty, do you think I'm such a coward? Shen Yu pressed his finger against the man's broad palm. Your Majesty, you don't have to worry about me. Shen Yu's heart. Shang Junlin's palm. Shen Yu's hand. Shen Yu's hand touched. Shen Yu's hand's palm's hand. Shen Yu's hand was itchy. He withdrew his hand. Your Majesty can do whatever you want. I didn't come with your Majesty to restrict your Majesty's actions. I know. No matter what happens later, you can't be afraid of me. Shang Junlin held Shen Yu's hand tightly. I won't. Not long after, the carriage stopped. As before, Shang Junlin got off the carriage first, followed by Shen Yu. Shang Junlin carried Shen Yu out. He ignored the Minister of Justice's stunned gaze and said, "Take me there." The Minister of Justice quickly restrained his expression. Yes. He knew that His Majesty would come, but he did not expect that His Majesty would bring His Majesty with him. When he saw Shen Yu coming out of the carriage, his first reaction was shock. Why did His Majesty bring His Majesty with him? At present, everyone in the court knew that the Emperor doted on His Majesty and discussed important matters of court with him. It wasn't that the officials didn't want to object, but Shen Yu had grasped the decree so well that they couldn't find a reasonable place to refute. If His Majesty brought His Majesty to other places, the Minister of Justice could understand. But why did His Majesty bring His Majesty to the prison of the Ministry of Justice? Suppressing the various thoughts in his heart, the Minister of Justice obediently led the way with his head lowered. He was just curious, but he did not dare to ask. The structure of the prison of the Ministry of Justice was different from that of the secret prison. The Minister of Justice led the two through the prison cells and came to the innermost part. The criminals who had committed capital crimes were locked up here. The jailers who guarded here were selected in advance. They knew Shang Junlin's identity and did not dare to neglect him. They took out the key to open the door and brought the prisoner to the interrogation room. Grand Tutor Zhang was tied up. 2 jailers stood on either side of him. This was to prevent him from suddenly attacking people. There has been a lot of commotion in the prison these days. I was wondering what had happened. It turns out that His Majesty came personally. Grand Tutor Zhang raised his head and looked at the man sitting opposite him. Jin didn't come here to reminisce about the past. I know, Grand Tutor Zhang nodded. His Majesty is very busy every day. It is not easy for him to take time out to see me. But, His Majesty can come alone, but why did His Majesty bring the person sleeping next to him? The prison is not like other places. It would be bad if he was frightened. The Minister of Justice stood respectfully behind Shang Junlin. When he heard this, he was about to scold him for being rude when he heard His Majesty speak. You know my identity? Grand Tutor Xing snorted. Who doesn't know His Majesty Shen Guijun, who is the most favored in the harem? Shen Yu, it's good that you know. I don't have to introduce myself again. Since you know who I am, why don't you solve my doubts? Why did you attack me again and again? Grand Tutor Xing, because His Majesty likes His Majesty. Shen Yu, is this also the late Emperor's intention? Grand Tutor Xing, you can think of it that way. Shen Yu, since you are so obedient to the late Emperor, why didn't you hand over the power left by the late Emperor to the king of you? When the late Emperor chose you, did he think that a loyal dog would betray its master one day? His Majesty is really eloquent. Grand Tutor Xing turned to look at Shang Junlin. His Majesty just let him climb over your head like this. There is no need for a prisoner like you to worry about the matters between Jin and His Majesty. As long as His Majesty is happy, Jin will let him do whatever he wants. Shang Junlin said indifferently. As long as His Majesty is happy. Seeing that his instigation was unsuccessful, Grand Tutor Xing resentfully withdrew his gaze. He can't even protect himself. Why worry about other people's matters? The Minister of Justice couldn't help but whisper. Except for the beginning, Grand Tutor Xing's attitude was still quite cooperative. He would answer all of Shang Junlin's questions. These were the results of Fang Jun's interrogation. Shang Junlin asked again to lower Grand Tutor Xing's guard. He wanted him to think that this was all they wanted to know. In the end, Shang Junlin stood up. Jin has always been curious. When the late Emperor was alive, he didn't seem to care much about Shang Junyue. Why did he leave him so many things before his death? If he really wanted to make Shang Junyue the emperor, he could have made Shang Junyue the crown prince. Naturally, it's because the Prince of Yu is the late emperor's son. Grand Tutor Xing answered without hesitation. The late emperor had so many princes. Why was the Prince of Yu the only exception? If Xin Yu remembered correctly, other than Shang Junlin and Shang Junyue, there were other princes alive before the late emperor died. Shang Junlin only killed a few who were good at seizing power. He didn't touch those who weren't competitive or were too young. How can we, as subjects, guess the late emperor's thoughts? I was just following the late emperor's orders. Jin will take it that you really don't know. Shang Junlin walked slowly to the rack where the instruments of torture were placed. He took a soft bone whip from the rack. Now, Jin will ask you. Were you the one who gave the order to harm the noble prince? Don't use the late emperor to fool Jin. The late emperor is already dead. He couldn't have foreseen the noble prince's existence. Jin will only ask, were you the one who gave the order? Yes. Grand Tutor Xing closed his eyes in the face of the imposing man. Very good. As soon as he finished speaking, a sharp gust of wind swept past. Slap, the bone whip had barbs on it. With one lash, the skin and flesh were torn open. No one expected Shang Junlin to suddenly make a move. The Minister of Justice widened his eyes in shock as he looked at the man wielding the whip. Shen Yu suddenly remembered that on the way here, Shang Junlin had said that he would avenge him. The smell of blood spread. Big beads of sweat rolled down Grand Tutor Xing's forehead. It was painful. 3 times. Zhen will remember them all. Shang Junlin's tone was cold. Grand Tutor Xing, who was very close to Shang Junlin, could clearly feel the cold murderous intent from the man. It seemed that compared to the rebellion, Shang Junlin cared more about the fact that Shang Junlin had injured his noble prince. The bone spike was soaked in salt water. Under the piercing pain, all of his consciousness was used to resist the pain. After being locked up in prison, those people had tortured him many times in order to get useful information out of him. However, none of them had caused him to suffer as much pain as today. The wound was burning hot. Shang Junlin had used his skills and specifically chose the most painful place to strike. What he wanted was to make the other party feel unbearable pain. Your Majesty is really a sentimental person. Grand Tutor Xing clenched his teeth. His voice trembled slightly. Zhen warned you before not to touch the noble prince. It seems that Grand Tutor Xing didn't take it to heart. Grand Tutor Xing thought of the miserable end of those people who had been arranged to deal with Xin Yu and fell silent. Noble prince, this. Wasn't he here to interrogate about the rebellion? Why didn't His Majesty care about this important matter at all? The Minister of Justice couldn't help but ask in a low voice. Xin Yu was only shocked for a moment. When he heard the Minister of Justice's question, he got up and walked to Shang Junlin's side. He hooked his finger and said, "Your Majesty." Shang Junlin threw away the bone whip in disgust and held Xin Yu's hand. His fingers were slightly cold. Shang Junlin turned his head and looked at Xin Yu for a while. When he saw that there was no fear on his face, he was slightly relieved. You were ordered by the late emperor to assist the king of Yu to ascend the throne. However, you, who had been in power for many years, changed your mind halfway. Instead of wholeheartedly serving the king of Yu, it's better to slightly change the situation. It's still you who helped the king of Yu to ascend the throne. However, the one who can really make the decision is you, who controls the forces left behind by the late emperor. Xin Yu's indifferent voice smashed into Grand Tutor Zhang's chest. Grand Tutor Zhang's mind was mostly occupied by the pain. He had no time to spare more energy to deal with Xin Yu's question. Yes, you're right. Obviously, those forces are in my hands. Why should I lower myself to the king of Yu? In fact, I don't mind telling you that the late emperor chose me to do this because he thought that I wouldn't be tempted by power. However, he never asked me if I was willing or not. I'm not willing. I have a bright future. Why should I be a dead person who can't see the light of day? Grand Tutor Xing looked at Shang Junlin's face, which was somewhat similar to the late emperor's, and almost couldn't control his emotions. If you really didn't want to, you could have refused at that time. Xin Yu's tone was calm. He wasn't affected by Grand Tutor Zhang's attitude. It's useless. Like I said, the late emperor was the emperor, and I was the subject. If I didn't agree, then I would have really died. It said that the late emperor was angry because of my death. How many people know that the person who was sent to kill me wasn't some treacherous subject, but the late emperor? The late emperor wanted his own bloodline to become the master of the Great Huang country. I didn't want to. Unfortunately, he didn't completely let down his guard against me until he died. If not, why would I waste so much time on the king of Yu? Now that the forces under my command have been almost wiped out, and I'm locked up in prison, I know that I can't escape this disaster. Perhaps I shouldn't have chosen this path in the first place. It's better to die cleanly than to die now. Grand Tutor Xing glanced at Xin Yu. The young man was dressed in white, and his temperament was like bamboo. Standing in the dark prison, he didn't fit in with his surroundings. He was just like the old him who was able to protect his own heart even when he was surrounded by treacherous people. Grand Tutor Xing lowered his head and looked at Xin Yu. He remembered that he used to be high-spirited and vigorous. He was able to form his own faction in the materialistic officialdom. He wasn't affected by external factors, and his reputation spread far and wide. Who wouldn't praise him for his strength of character? In the end, he became the kind of person that he used to hate the most. Don't you want to know about the late emperor's other arrangements? I can tell you what I know. In exchange, I only ask one thing. The mistake I made was my own, and it has nothing to do with Grand Tutor Xing. The dead shouldn't appear in this world again. Chapter 196. Right now, you are a prisoner. What qualifications do you think you have to make demands? Moreover, many people in the court already know your identity. No matter what your original intention was, the one who pushed you to this point was not others, but yourself. Xinyu said. You are right. Grand Tutor Xing froze, his momentum waning. It is nothing more than deceiving myself. The previous emperor left behind 500,000 soldiers and horses. I can only mobilize half of them. I don't know where the rest are. He also left behind a large amount of money and jewelry. I can only take 30% of it. Oh right, this batch of property includes a large number of armor left behind by the once invincible Lin family army. Grand Tutor Zheng explained a lot. Xinyu and Shang Junlin stayed in the prison for more than 2 hours before leaving. Sitting in the carriage back to the palace, Xinyu held a hand stove. Your Majesty, how much of Grand Tutor Zheng's words are true and how much is false? Xinyu didn't think that Grand Tutor Zheng would reveal all the truth because of one caning. If it was really that simple, Fong Darren wouldn't have asked for so long without any useful information. No matter how much of it is true and how much of it is false, Xin will send people to verify it one by one. Although he said the arrangements left behind by the previous emperor, he didn't say where these undiscovered arrangements are. Only he knows if he really doesn't know or if he deliberately doesn't say. Xinyu nodded, let Fong Darren continue to interrogate him. Maybe he can find something. Xinyu originally wanted to take this opportunity to see the king of Yu, but he had been delayed at Grand Tutor Zheng's place for too long. The sky was almost dark. In addition, Shang Junlin didn't want him to see the king of Yu, so he didn't go. After returning to Yuzhang Palace, eunuch Meng hurriedly ordered people to prepare hot water. Xinyu took a comfortable bath and changed into clean clothes. Shang Junlin also changed into light clothes. If he didn't need to go to court, he wouldn't wear a complicated ceremonial robe. Instead, he preferred simple casual clothes. A man in a black wide-sleeved robe sat on the edge of a soft couch. In front of him was a small table with a thick stack of memorials. The man's back was straight as he wrote his comments. He was very fast and placed the booklets to the side. After a few books, eunuch Meng would take them down and place them on the table on the other side. It was very warm in the bedroom. Xinyu had just finished bathing and was wearing thin clothes. Hearing footsteps, Shang Junlin looked up. He put down his pen, picked up his cloak, and walked towards Xinyu. Why are you wearing so little? I'm not cold. Xinyu raised his neck so that the man could tie the belt of his cloak for him. Even if you're not cold, you can't wear such thin clothes. Yes, Your Majesty. Shang Junlin nodded in satisfaction. Xinyu was hugged by the man and sat down on the soft couch. She happened to see the half-approved memorials on the small table. They were presented by the officials of Lin County. After a year of hard work, the flood control in Lin County was very effective. This year's spring flood was the best time to check the results. After getting a use prescription, the people I sent to Lin County to control the flood were treated as if they had found a treasure. This year, they followed the contents of the prescription. Last year, several small floods were passed without any mishaps. Shang Junlin stroked Xinyu's long hair on her back. It's good that it's effective. Xinyu's eyes curved. The reason why he took out these things was because they could be of use to De Huan. In the face of a natural disaster, human strength would always be insignificant. However, not all natural disasters could only make people helpless. Some could be prevented in advance to minimize the losses as much as possible. After the beginning of spring, the imperial court fell into a new round of busyness. The reform of the new commercial law was proposed at this time. Unsurprisingly, there were many objections in the imperial court. Any reform would have to go through this. Shen Yu accepted it well. Shang Junlin ignored the arguments in the imperial court for a few days and finally agreed to the reform proposed by the Minister of Revenue. Your Majesty, you can't. Compared to the previous dynasty, De Huan already gives preferential treatment to merchants. We can't let them grow. The Minister of Revenue was dissatisfied. Have you carefully read the proposal I proposed? If you have carefully read it, you will never say such a thing. If you want to object, I welcome it. However, the reason for your objection must be substantial. Don't just think about it. The official did not carefully read the new commercial law proposed by the Minister of Revenue. He was speechless by the Minister of Revenue's words. Well, this matter will be handed over to the Minister of Revenue. Is there anything else to report? Shang Junlin's attitude was very clear. Since this matter had been decided, there was no need to talk nonsense. The first thing to do in the new year was to change the law regarding merchants. In fact, there were not many changes. For example, the son of a merchant could not enter the imperial court as an official. However, there were some additions. For example, Yan Zheng's previous actions of sponsoring the Ministry of Works to build roads and merchants from all over Subei had been approved by the imperial court. The imperial court would give them preferential treatment based on their contributions. After an entire winter, the stone tablet engraved with the contributions of the donors was carved. In the future, it would be placed in the most conspicuous place in the capital. It would be protected by a fence so that the common people could go and see it. The People's Newspaper did a special report on this matter, including the change of the commercial law. The common people did not pay much attention to the latter. Their attention was focused on the former matter. The People's Newspaper said that the stone tablet has been engraved. It will be displayed on the auspicious day chosen by the imperial astronomer. I saw it too. There are only 10 days left. I must go and see it then. I donated a lot of things. Thinking that my name will be engraved by the imperial court, I am so excited. Yes, we are just common people. Who would have thought that there would be a day like this? For a time, the common people's hot topic changed to the stone tablet that was about to be completed. They followed the disaster in Subei. Seeing that Subei, which they had contributed money and effort to, become better and better after the disaster, everyone felt satisfied. Who didn't want to be rewarded for their efforts? Although the reward wasn't anything substantial, it could give people a great sense of satisfaction. Oh right, today is the day that the Jing, a newspaper, is published. Are you going to buy it? Of course, this newspaper is cheap. It even has a special section for literacy. Not to mention, I can barely understand some of it now. Me too. If you buy 10 copies of the newspaper, you can get a free literacy book. Including the one I buy tomorrow, I can get a book. My son is about to learn literacy. It will be useful. I never thought that I'd be literate one day. Maybe in the future, His Majesty will hold a big literacy program and every family will be literate. In the past, the common people didn't think much about literacy. Since the publication of the newspaper, they gradually felt the disadvantages of being illiterate. Now that there was a way to become literate and the price was not expensive, the common people who had some extra money were happy to learn. The Jing, a newspaper that the common people talked about, was a newspaper jointly published by Shen Yu's bookstore and the imperial court. It was cheap and published once every 10 days. Later, after discussion between Shen Yu and Shang Junlin, they opened a special section in the newspaper. It was not big, but it would put some basic words for the purchasers to learn. The aristocratic ministers were busy with various things in the imperial court and didn't notice the changes in the common people. When they found out, the foundation had already been laid. Even if they were dissatisfied, they couldn't do anything. King Yu was dreaming again. He knew that he was dreaming because the development in the dream was completely different from reality. In the dream, all his plans were carried out smoothly. Under his plan, Shang Junlin's reputation was getting worse and worse. The most important thing was that Shen Yu didn't enter the palace. The one who entered the palace was Shen Qingran, the son of a concubine of Count Junbei. From the beginning to the end, no one in the palace was conferred the title of nobility. In this dream, the person that Shen Yu fell in love with was him. The camp that he chose was also him. Shen Yu went back to his fief with him and took care of everything for him. Under the tyrannical rule of Shang Junlin, a steady stream of people came to seek refuge with him. They brought a lot of money and soldiers. In the dream, it was as if he had the help of God. Everything went smoothly. He saw Shang Junlin lose little by little. The imperial court's prestige collapsed, and his own power grew stronger and stronger. Time passed quickly in the dream. He saw a major flood in a neighboring county. He stepped forward bravely at the critical moment. He saw a plague break out in the south. He led people to get rid of the plague. The people gradually shifted to him. The northern bandits rebelled. Shang Junlin led troops to battle. He died in the last battle. Since then, the world was in chaos. He ascended the throne with the support of the people. Then he woke up from the dream. The night before his ascension, he was woken up by the jailer. For the next few days, he repeatedly had the same dream. Without exception, he woke up on the night before his ascension. At first, the dream was vague. Later, it became more and more real. It was so real that he couldn't help but wonder if things would develop like in his dream if Shen Yu didn't enter the palace. The jailer who was guarding King Yu realized that King Yu had started to speak nonsense. It was all disgraceful words. He did not dare to hide it and reported this matter. King Yu went crazy. People who don't know will think that we are abusing him. Shang Junlin listened to the report and sneered. Shen Yu sat on the side and fiddled with a chess record. The chess record was found in the Imperial Library. Seeing that Shen Yu was interested, Shang Junlin gave it to him. What did he do? Shen Yu put down the chess record and asked. Replying to Your Highness, the prisoner has been talking nonsense in the prison. He said. The Minister of Justice glanced at Shang Junlin and bravely continued, that he is about to ascend the throne. Your Majesty, please forgive me. This subject is just repeating, we didn't do anything. Why are you so afraid? Shang Junlin was displeased. The Minister of Justice thought, you didn't do anything. But with the cold air around you, I would believe you if you said that you were going to drag me out and behead me. Tell me the details. Yes. Some time ago, King Yu's behavior was not quite right. The jailer didn't take it seriously. In recent days, the jailer found that he often talked nonsense. Something about the flood in Lin County, the plague in the south, the rebellion of the northern bandits. Finally, he said that he was the one who ended everything and that he should be the destined ruler of Dehuan. Shen Yu didn't take it seriously at first. The more he listened, the more he felt that something was wrong. A single incident could be a coincidence. What if everything was related to the previous life? His heart sank unconsciously. Was King Yu talking about the previous life? Was he also reborn? Your Highness, do you know why King Yu said such things? Shen Yu's hands slowly clenched by his side. It was because he was dreaming. I have confirmed that what King Yu said was in his dream. He seems to be unable to distinguish between dreams and reality. The Minister of Justice said. Did he dream of the previous life? Shen Yu fell silent. According to the Minister of Justice, he didn't seem to dream of the previous life. Otherwise, he wouldn't be immersed in the dream and not wake up. Should he tell him to turn the dream into a nightmare? Chapter 197. Shen Yu was thinking about something and didn't notice that the Minister of Justice had left under Shang Junlin's signal. He also didn't notice that Shang Junlin had walked to his side. What is you thinking about? Shang Junlin looked at Shen Yu, who had fallen into silence after listening to the Minister of Justice's words, and his expression was unclear. I'm thinking about what the Minister of Justice said. Is Prince Yu pretending to be crazy or acting dumb? Shen Yu came back from his thoughts. Shang Junlin, you thinks he's pretending. Shen Yu, what else could it be? Your Majesty once locked him up in the dark prison for so long, but nothing happened to him. How could he go crazy after just a few days in the Ministry of Justice's prison? Shang Junlin, Yu's words make sense. Shen Yu, whether he's really crazy or not, we'll know when we see him. Shang Junlin fell silent and looked at Shen Yu without saying anything. Your Majesty, why are you looking at me? Shen Yu opened his eyes wide with an innocent look on his face. Shang Junlin raised his hand to cover his eyes and said with an inexplicable emotion, So, Yu wants to see Prince Yu? I'm a little concerned about his dream. Shen Yu didn't deny it. I want to know what's going on. I remember that Yu also had a dream before. When he woke up and saw me, he was very scared. What did Yu dream about that day? Shang Junlin couldn't forget this matter because the emotions that appeared in Shen Yu's eyes that day were something he had never seen before. A person's eyes couldn't lie. If he was really afraid of someone, no matter how well he pretended, there would still be clues in his eyes. He was sure that Shen Yu wasn't afraid of him. When they first met, Shen Yu didn't show any fear in his eyes. Later, when they met day and night for a long time, he didn't see any fear in Shen Yu's eyes. No matter how good a person was at disguising himself, it was impossible for him to not leave behind any flaws for a long time. I had a bad dream. I didn't see His Majesty in the dream, so I woke up in fright. To be honest, that dream didn't have much to do with the previous life. Rather than saying that it was related to the previous life, it was better to say that Shen Yu was afraid that he would follow in the same footsteps in this life. Shang Junlin didn't care about Prince Yu, but if this matter was related to Shen Yu, he couldn't ignore it. Hence, he instructed the hidden dragon guards to get information about the dream from King Yu no matter what method they used. Perhaps he dreamt of what he thought about during the day. That night, Shen Yu dreamt of something related to his previous life. The flames of war swirled in the air as the sounds of killing shook the heavens. He was protected in someone's arms as they passed through the rain of blades and swords. At first, he thought that the person protecting him was Gu Huai from his previous life. Later on, he realized that it was wrong. The time and place were not right. He had never had such close contact with Gu Huai before. The two of them only had a cooperative relationship. Other than the necessary interactions, Gu Huai rarely took the initiative to talk to him. However, the man in his dream was different. His mouth opened and closed as if he was talking non-stop. Shen Yu wanted to hear him clearly, but it was as if there was a layer of cover. No matter how anxious he was, he couldn't hear him. The weather was very cold. It seemed like it was snowing. He curled up in the man's arms and absorbed the only warmth he could. In the darkness, Shen Yu suddenly opened his eyes. His waist was restrained and his back was leaning against a heat source. The warmth kept coming. It was exactly the same as the feeling in his dream. Shen Yu smiled silently. No wonder he had such a dream. In the dream, they were in a world of ice and snow, isolated and helpless. Outside the dream, they were hugging each other and sleeping in a warm palace. It was so nice. Shen Yu turned around and sniffed the man's scent that made him feel at ease. He slowly closed his eyes. The arm around his waist pulled him closer to his chest. When they woke up the next day, it was drizzling outside. The spring rain continued, and the plants grew new branches and leaves. They were verdant and lush, and the grass by the roadside bloomed with white flowers. Shinyu held an umbrella in one hand and strolled in the rain. The orchids that young master planted have bloomed. Do you want to go and take a look? Mushi followed behind him and whispered. Shinyu turned around. I saw that there were no buds 2 days ago, and now they're blooming. Yes, several of them have bloomed. The ant in charge of taking care of the flowers and plants told me this morning. Mushi knew that her young master liked to grow flowers, so she deliberately mentioned it. All right, let's go and take a look. The flower house was not far from where they were, and they arrived after walking for about a quarter of an hour. Instead of calling it a flower house, it was more appropriate to call it a flower hole. Most of the flowers inside were sent by Shang Junlin. Shinyu grew flowers as a hobby. He did not care whether the flowers were expensive or not. The flowers sent by Shang Junlin were the same. He sent all the suitable ones that he thought Shinyu would like. It's really strange. The flower sent by Princeton has bloomed for almost half a year, but there are no signs of it withering. The flower was in a conspicuous position. Mushi saw it as soon as she came in. Shinyu looked up. It's blooming beautifully. As if it understood Shinyu's praise, the flower swayed gently. Shinyu looked around and saw the flower that Mushi was talking about. He walked over. When the flower was sent by His Majesty, it was withered. Look, young master, it's full of vitality now. The flowers in the flower house were carefully taken care of. Not to mention that Shinyu personally took care of them, but the fact that these flowers belonged to Shinyu made the palace servants dare not be careless. Now, everyone in the palace knew how much His Majesty was favored. Serving His Majesty well would have a better future than serving in other places. Shinyu walked around the flower house and asked, "What's the situation outside the palace?" Mushi, everything in the Marquis mansion is as usual. Duke Shinbei and his confidants have secret talks in the study room every day. Inghua's people found a way to sneak in and found that they were talking about how to get Duke Shinbei back to work in the imperial court. Shinyu, Duke Shinbei has always valued the development of the Marquis mansion. Now that he has been stripped of his position and Shin Qingran can't be relied on, he has to find a way to return to the imperial court. Mushi, those confidants of Duke Shinbei seem to want Duke Shinbei to come to you for help. They said that with His Majesty's favor, as long as you are willing to speak, the predicament of the Duke Shinbei's mansion can be easily solved. Not only the Duke Shinbei's mansion, but other officials also said so. After Duke Shinbei lost power, not everyone drew a clear line with him at the first time. Some people thought that no matter what, Duke Shinbei was Shinyu's biological father. Shinyu couldn't leave him alone. What's more, if His Majesty really thought about His Majesty, he wouldn't let the Duke Shinbei's mansion decline like this. So in the beginning, several aristocratic families who wanted to marry Duke Shinbei's mansion didn't give up the idea because of this matter. It was only after Shinyu passed down the news that these families stopped. Shinyu, they are indeed right. His Majesty originally wanted to vent his anger. After this anger is vented, won't he restore Duke Shinbei's position? Then, young master, will Duke Shinbei's position really be restored? Mushi didn't want Duke Shinbei to enjoy the convenience brought by His Majesty at all. I can't control the affairs of the imperial court. Whether Duke Shinbei can be restored to his original position or not, only His Majesty knows. Speaking of this matter, Shinyu was also very curious about how Shang Junlin would deal with it. If it was a big mistake, Duke Shinbei didn't commit much. The matter of adoption was only mentioned verbally but not implemented. Of course, Shinyu wouldn't give him a chance to implement it. How is concubine Ru? Shinyu felt that he hadn't heard any news about this person for a long time. She lives in seclusion. It seems that she is completely disappointed with Duke Shinbei. Why do you suddenly ask about her? She was puzzled. If I remember correctly, when concubine Ruth came to the Duke Shinbei's mansion, my mother was still there. Ask Dinghua to go there and see if she can find out something about my mother. Yes. At the beginning of his rebirth, Shin Yu just wanted to know the identity of the woman who gave birth to him. With the development of various things, he found that there were many secrets behind this matter. About the assassination when he was young, the framing at the New Year's banquet. If he didn't investigate clearly, no one knew what would happen one day in the future. Shin Yu didn't like to be in a passive state. Knowing that someone wanted to kill him and hurt Shang Junlin, he couldn't be indifferent. In any case, he had to find out the truth of the matter and find out the person who wanted to kill him. There was also Zhu Wang. He had to think of a way to pry open his mouth. Shin Yu had a group of hidden dragon guards. It was given to him by Shang Junlin. He didn't hide the matter of investigating Zhu Wang from Shang Junlin, so he didn't use the power of Dinghua. Instead, he let the hidden dragon guards handle it. He knew that after he gave the order, Shang Junlin would know about it. So, he took the initiative to mention this matter to Shang Junlin. Your Majesty, I want to investigate Zhu Wang's past. Maybe I can find some useful clues. They had too few clues. Shin Yu knew that it would be difficult to investigate this matter. However, if he didn't find out the truth, he and Shang Junlin could only be in a passive state. This was something that he couldn't tolerate. You, just do whatever you want to do. You don't have to inform me. I gave you the hidden dragon guards. You have the right to order them around. I want to ask for your Majesty's help. I want to investigate all of Zhu Wang's past. However, it might not be easy to do so. Zhu Wang was locked up in the secret prison. For a long time, no one cared about him. The endless loneliness was the most torturous. He didn't talk to anyone for a long time. This made him want to talk to anyone he saw. Even if he was interrogated, he was willing to do so. After Shang Junlin heard about the Dream Realm from the hidden dragon guards, he was silent for a long time. For some reason, he didn't tell Shin Yu immediately. Shin Yu was still concerned about King Yu's Dream Realm. He told Shang Junlin that he wanted to meet King Yu. He's about to die. Does you want to meet him? Shang Junlin caressed Shin Yu's face. His eyes were dark and gloomy. Has the Ministry of Justice decided on the time of his execution? Shin Yu was stunned. In the end, Shang Junlin brought Shin Yu to the Ministry of Justice's prison. Shang Junlin's behavior was a little abnormal. Shin Yu thought that he was jealous of King Yu. He didn't think too much about it. He wanted to know what happened to King Yu as soon as possible. King Yu was getting more and more confused. When he saw Shin Yu and Shang Junlin, the first thing he said was, "Aren't you dead?" It was hard not to suspect that he did it on purpose. Shin Yu tilted his head and looked at Shang Junlin. The man's face was calm. He didn't seem affected by King Yu's words. "Your Highness, can you recognize me?" Shin Yu lowered his voice. It was similar to the tone he used in his previous life. You? King Yu turned his head and looked at him. When the same title came out of King Yu's mouth, he felt disgusted. Shin Yu's eyes flashed with disgust. He felt the arm around his waist tighten. Shin Yu tilted his head and said, "Your Highness, I want to talk to him." Just one sentence. Although Shang Junlin was dissatisfied, he didn't refuse. Shin Yu walked in front of King Yu and squatted down. He said in a voice that only the two of them could hear, "Your Highness, how does it feel to have a sword pierce through your heart?" King Yu's blank expression was replaced by fear. No, King Yu died on the eve of his ascension. That was his real ending in his previous life. Chapter 198. The fog that had been covering his mind dispersed. King Yu finally remembered the last part of his dream. On the eve of his ascension to the throne, he was stabbed in the heart at the place closest to the throne. Until his death, he didn't really sit on the throne. At that time, Shin Yu also said the same thing. Now, the same words awakened the truth that he didn't want to face. It turned out that he didn't wake up at the most critical time in the dream, but he didn't want to believe the final result. Subconsciously, he chose to forget this memory. Shin Yu looked at King Yu's frightened appearance with satisfaction. He stood up straight and turned around without mercy. The hem of his cloak was grabbed and his movement was hindered. Shin Yu stopped, but he didn't look back. He heard King Yu's hoarse voice behind him. How do you know? Those things are real, aren't they? So what if they are real, so what if they are fake? The result is the same. Shin Yu's voice was calm. His purpose of coming here had been achieved. He was now sure that King Yu was only dreaming about his previous life, and not like him, he was reborn. He was too familiar with the King Yu of his previous life. The one sitting at his feet now was not the same person. You betrayed me twice, Shin Yu. Why? King Yu clenched the hem of his cloak tightly. He didn't want to let go. He wanted to know the answer. In his previous life, they had a good relationship. Shin Yu also devoted his heart to him. Why was it that in the end, it was Shin Yu who destroyed everything he had? King Yu couldn't understand. In his previous life, Shang Junlin didn't exist. Shin Yu didn't enter the palace. He didn't even have any relationship with this person. Why did he fail in the end? He was only one step away. Shang Junlin stood not far from the two of them and heard their conversation clearly. The aura around him became extremely cold. The Minister of Justice, who was standing behind him, felt his heart in his throat. Did he hear some secret that he shouldn't know? Shang Junlin knew that Shin Yu had a lot of secrets. For example, he was obviously not valued by Count Junbei, so why did he know so much that he shouldn't know? He didn't delve into it because he knew that Shin Yu didn't want to talk about it. She was willing to show her differences in front of him, which showed her trust in him. Didn't Shang Junlin want to know Shin Yu's secret? No, he wanted to know more than anyone else. But he was willing to wait for the day when Shin Yu was willing to take the initiative to tell him. Shang Junlin had always thought that he could ignore it. He had always been the most patient hunter, but at this moment, he realized that he could not do it. He could not remain indifferent to the fact that Shin Yu and the Prince of Yu had a common secret, especially when it was related to the dream that the Prince of Yu had. Shang Junlin had already gotten all the information about the dream from the hidden dragon guards. He couldn't imagine how Shin Yu would give everything to the Prince of Yu. He couldn't imagine how intimate the two of them might have been, even if it only happened in the dream. As long as he thought of those things, the ruthlessness in his heart would be like rolling waves, boiling endlessly. Shang Junlin walked over and stepped on the Prince of Yu's hand that was grabbing onto Shin Yu's clothes. Under the pain, the Prince of Yu had no choice but to let go. Shang Junlin hugged Shin Yu like an evil dragon declaring its sovereignty. A Yu is not someone you can covet. Do you think you are worth a Yu's betrayal? The sarcasm was like a sharp sword stabbing into the Prince of Yu's heart. The Prince of Yu laughed out loud. If he can treat me like this, he will treat you like this sooner or later. Shang Junlin, what are you so proud of? I will wait for the day when we end up in the same situation. Shin Yu felt helpless when he felt the grip on his waist tighten. He thought that Shang Junlin didn't know anything. Now, it seemed like that wasn't the case. The Prince of Yu struggled madly. Shang Junlin frowned. When the Minister of Justice saw this, he quickly ordered the guards to restrain the crazy Prince of Yu. Don't you have anything to say to me? The Prince of Yu struggled to look at Shin Yu. Why did you betray me? If it wasn't for the guards holding him down, he would have pounced on Shinyu. Shinyu sighed. What does the Prince of You want me to say? Other than the fact that I tried to get close to you using deception as an excuse, what else do I have to say? King Yu was stunned for a moment before he struggled even harder. He whimpered and mumbled some unclear words. Shinyu had already settled the grudges from his previous life. Although the result was tragic, in this life, the Prince of You would pay the price for his crimes. You doesn't have anything to say to me. After returning to the palace, Shang Junlin dismissed the palace servants. Only Shinyu and himself were left in the huge palace. Your Majesty knows the content of the Prince of Yu's dream. Shang Junlin nodded. Shinyu looked at the man. Is your Majesty afraid? What is there to be afraid of? Shang Junlin stroked Shinyu's face and gently stroked it. Even if a Yu is an immortal or a demon, he can only be mine. Shinyu choked on the words he wanted to say. He originally wanted to ask if Shang Junlin was afraid that he would treat him like how he treated the Prince of You. However, when he heard Shang Junlin's words, he suddenly realized that Shang Junlin and Shang Junlin were two completely different people. Would Shang Junlin be afraid of him because of this? He already knew the answer in his heart. Actually, I also had the same dream as the Prince of You before I entered the palace. Shinyu gently rubbed Shang Junlin's hand. After the first sentence came out, the following words were much easier to say. Since your Majesty knows the content of this dream, I won't go into detail. I don't know if this dream is real or not, but it doesn't prevent me from hating the Prince of You because of this dream. I hate being deceived and schemed against the most. So, you chose to do the opposite of what he did in the dream, right? Yes. Originally, when Shin Qingran and his mother schemed against me, I was bound to fight back. Now, I'm glad that I made the decision in the heat of the moment. Otherwise, how could I meet your Majesty? I'm also very glad. Shang Junlin pulled her into his arms. With a Yu, I can't imagine life without a Yu. In the dream, I was blind and couldn't see the true face of the Prince of You. I was deceived by him for so long. Shinyu leaned into the man's arms and said in a muffled voice. What happened after that? What did Yu say to the Prince of You that made him have such a big reaction? Shang Junlin gently patted Shinyu's back. In a place where Shinyu couldn't see, his eyes were dark. Of course, I shattered his dream. The Prince of You thought that he succeeded in ascending the throne in his dream. In fact, he didn't. I just let him know that whether it was in his dream or in reality, his ambition would be in vain in the end. Shang Junlin was an emperor himself. He knew how much he had to sacrifice in order to make the Prince of Yu's plan fail under such circumstances. His heart was split into two halves. Half of his heart was crazily jealous of the Prince of You in his dream. The other half was extremely distressed for Shinyu's experience in his dream, even if it was just a dream. This caused Shang Junlin's actions at night to be particularly unpredictable. He switched back and forth between being rough and extremely gentle. Shinyu was tormented quite badly. He kicked her, "Stay away from me." Unsurprisingly, her ankle fell into the palm of the man's hand. Under the gentle peck, her body couldn't help but tremble. Her tears couldn't be controlled and slid down her cheeks. The man patiently kissed her away. His movements were extremely gentle, as if the storm just now was an illusion of Shinyu. Indulging in the gentleness, Shinyu's resistance became weaker and weaker. You can only be mine." The same sentence was repeated over and over again in Shinyu's ears, as if it was imprinted into his bones. You, tell me, who do you belong to? Shinyu replied randomly, "I am your Majesty's." Yu is so obedient. The next day, when Shinyu woke up, those words still lingered in his mind. It was as if a unique mark had been engraved in his mind, constantly reminding him that he only belonged to Shang Junlin. Thinking about what happened last night, Shen Yu's face became hot. A jealous man really shouldn't be provoked. Fortunately, Shang Junlin didn't continue to ask about the dream. Shen Yu lay on the bed and sighed as if his body was falling apart. At first, he considered whether or not he should take this opportunity to tell Shang Junlin about his rebirth. After hesitating for a while, he didn't say anything. He only said that he had the same dream as Prince Yu. He didn't know if Shang Junlin believed him or not. Rubbing his sore back, Shen Yu was glad that he didn't tell the truth. It was just a dream, but it made the man have such a big reaction. If he told him that it really happened, he would most likely die in bed. 2 days later, Shen Yu could barely get out of bed and walk normally. It was also the day to set the tombstone outside the palace. Shang Junlin agreed to take him to see it. The time to set the tombstone was calculated in advance by the imperial astronomer. In order to not miss it, Shen Yu deliberately got up early in the morning. Shang Junlin stood behind him and helped him tie up his hair. "You, why are you so enthusiastic?" There was a trace of undetectable grievance in his tone. Shen Yu pretended that he didn't hear it and focused on choosing the clothes to wear later. The location was at East Street. Early in the morning, the people who got the news in advance put down their work and came to watch. High officials, noble people, rich people, and ordinary people came from all walks of life. Some small vendors who saw business opportunities moved their stalls here to do business. Because there were so many people, business was very good. Because the number of people who came to watch far exceeded expectations, the imperial government had to borrow people from the imperial guards to maintain order. The carriage reached the corner and couldn't move forward anymore. The imperial guards in charge of maintaining order knew the identity of the person sitting in the carriage and didn't dare to neglect. They took a detour to the center of the street. "Who is in the carriage? Didn't they say that the carriage is not allowed to pass? It must be a noble person. There are several officials who came today. I heard that the Minister of Works, the Minister of Revenue, Minister Fong, and other officials are all here." After the carriage drove for a distance, it stopped. Shen Yu and Shang Junlin got off the carriage and went up to the attic under the guidance of the imperial guards. This was a place specially prepared for the rich and powerful. They couldn't squeeze with the ordinary people when the officials came. If something happened, no one could bear the responsibility. Shang Junlin had the status of Dehuan. Naturally, he chose the best place. Shen Yu and Shang Junlin entered the inner room. Through the window, they could see the situation outside clearly. There are so many people. Shen Yu sighed. In the center of the crowd, there was a huge tombstone covered with a red cloth. When the auspicious time came, the officials of the Ministry of Rights would lift the red cloth. The servants brought tea and all kinds of snacks. Shen Yu picked up one and tasted it while looking down. Your Majesty, look. What is happening over there?" Shang Junlin looked in the direction Shen Yu pointed. He saw several imperial guards below them surrounding a husband and wife who were about 40 years old. He didn't know what they were talking about. "Isn't this person the woman in the house we went to take shelter from the rain last time?" Shen Yu recognized the woman.